of Nevada this October 23rd. It is 9 a.m. Mr. Foss, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. Are there any corrections or deletions to today's agenda? None? Okay, we have a scheduled item at 9:02. This is a resolution proclaiming November 5th through 11th as Rotary International's World Interact Week, and I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It gives me great pleasure to be able to enter this resolution into our board deliberation. I think we got 4 Rotarians up here, which is a great thing. So any one of us could be doing this. And we all understand Interact. It's a service club for youth 12 through 18, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. They do great stuff. They're kind of, I don't want to say mini Rotarians, but they're people who are aspiring to be Rotarians later on, I hope. But they do a variety of things, which will come out when I read this resolution. So I'll go ahead and read it, and then we can vote. This is a resolution proclaiming November 5 through 11, 2012 as Rotary International's World Interact Week in Nevada County and recognizing Interact's 50th anniversary. Whereas Interact is a Rotary service organization for youth ages through 12 through 18, and whereas Interact clubs foster leadership skills and an awareness of the needs in local communities and internationally, and whereas the first Interact club was chartered on November 5th, 1962, and today there are over 250,000 Interact members in 110 countries, and whereas in Western Nevada County, Nevada Union High School Interact Club was chartered in 1997, and the Interact clubs of Lyman Gilmore Middle School and at Seven Hills Middle School were chartered in 2010. And whereas combined, these clubs have over 60 youth members who perform a variety of community and international service projects following the Rotary International motto of service above self. And whereas some of these projects include raising funds for Rotary International's End Polio Now campaign, supporting Adopt a Family at the holidays, collecting books for international projects in Uganda and Papua New Guinea, being international pen pals with students in Papua New Guinea, serving meals at Hospitality House, helping youth in Colima, Mexico with literacy and dental projects so that children there can stay in school, and spreading the anti-bullying message through bully buttons. Now therefore be it hereby resolved that the Board of Supervisors of the County of Nevada proclaims the week of November 5 through 11, 2012 as Rotary International's World Interact Week in Nevada County and recognizes the organization on its 50th anniversary. Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of the resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Would anyone like to make a comment or before we take the vote? Okay. Roll call, please, Donna.
District 2?
Yes.
District 1?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes. And the resolution carries. We don't have a formal resolution for you today because we had to act on it, but if you would like to join us down below, we'd love to get a photograph with all the Interact people.
I do. Yes, properly.
The next order of business is public comment. Members of the public shall be allowed to address the board on matters that are subject to the board and within our jurisdiction on any item that does not appear on today's agenda. If you would like to do so, please join us at the microphone and state your name for the record. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Linda Chaplin, and I am here today to commemorate the 166th anniversary of the Donner Party. They became trapped in snow during the winter of 1846 up at Donner Lake. And actually today is this very date of the 36th anniversary of the bicentennial year, 1976, Overland Emigrant Trail plaque dedication. There was a big celebration here in Nevada County to remember the Overland Emigrant Trail and to place plaques at Big Bend, Highway 49 in Grass Valley, and at Johnson's Crossing. I hope, excuse me, you're the first people I've been talking to this morning. There was a nice write-up on a Donner Party article in the Sierra Heritage magazine in the February issue of this year. And it said that 1846 was actually the year of the family because so many families went overland. I think we tend to think of pioneers as men and women coming. But in 1846, a large number of families came, and actually of the 81 members that were trapped up at Donner Lake in the winter of 1846 and 1847, 41, that's half of the party, were children ranging in age from infants to 14 years. And when that came out of this article, when I read that, that really struck my heart. So I also wanted to read excerpts of a young woman, Virginia Reed, who was 12 years old at the time that she spent the winter there at Donner Lake. And this was published in George Stewart's book, Ordeal by Hunger, the story of the Donner Party. And she wrote a letter dated May 16th, 1847, to her cousin Mary. And she, at that time, she did survive the winter. She was located in Napa Valley at the time that she wrote the letter. And so this is kind of a perspective of a young person who's spent the winter there. And I won't read all of it because I know time is short and a lot of the story is already known, but this is a young person's viewpoint. She starts, "My dear cousin, I'm going to write to you about our troubles getting to California. We had good luck till we come to Big Sandy, which is a river. There we lost our best yoke of oxens. We came to Bridger's Fort and we lost another ox. We sold some of our provisions and bought a yoke of cows and oxen, and they persuaded us to take Hastings Cutoff over the Salt Plain. They said it saved 300 miles. We went that road, and we had to go through a long drive of 40 miles without water. Hastings said it was 40, but I think 80 miles. And as she discusses the trip through the Salt Flats continuing. So we went on that way a while, and we got out of provisions, and Pa had to go on to California for provisions. Then later, we went on that way a while, and we come to another long drive of 40 miles, and then we went with Mr. Donner. We had to walk all the time. We was traveling up the Truckee River. We met a man and two Indians that we had sent on for provisions to Sutter's Fort. They had met Pa not far from Sutter's Fort. He looked very bad. He had not ate but 3 times in 7 days, and the last 3 days without anything. Anyway, could pack on one mule, and we started. Martha and James rode behind the two Indians. It was raining then in the valleys and snowing on the mountains. So we went on that way 3 or 4 days till we come to the big mountain, or the California mountain. The snow then was about 3 feet deep, weather sort of like we've had just over the weekend. Anyway, the snow was then up to the mule's side. The farther we went up, the deeper the snow got, so the wagons could not go, so they packed their oxen and started with us, carrying a child apiece and driving the oxen in snow up to their waist. The mule Martha and the Indian was on was the best one, so they went and broke the road, and that Indian was the pilot. So we went on that way 2 miles, and the mules kept falling down in the snow head foremost, and the Indian said he could not find the road. We stopped and let the Indian and man go on to hunt the road. They went on and found the road to the top of the mountain and come back and said they thought we could get over it if it did not snow anymore. Well, the women were all tired carrying their children that they could not go over that night. So we made a fire and got something to eat, and Ma spread down a buffalo robe, and we all lay down on it and spread something over us, and Ma sit up by the fire, and it snowed 1 foot on top of the bed. So we got up in the morning, and the snow was so deep we could not go over, and we had to go back to the cabin and build more cabins and stay there all winter without Pa. We had not the first thing to eat. We stopped there the 4th of November and stayed till March. There was but 2 families that all of them got through. We was one. Oh, Mary, I have not wrote you half of the trouble we have had, but I have wrote you enough to let you know that you don't know what trouble is. But thank God we have all got through, and the only family that did not eat human flesh. We have left everything, but I don't care for that. We have got through with our lives. But don't let this letter dishearten anybody. Never take no cutoffs, and hurry along as fast as you can.
Thank you. Donner Lake actually looks very similar today.
That's what I thought. I was even wondering if you were going to be here.
Yeah, so was I.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to make a comment?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Orlick, and I'm a landowner living in Nate's district, District 1. We recently elected you, Mr. Beeson, to another supervisor's term. During your re-election campaign, I don't recall you addressing your constituents on why you voted to allow the variance to the zoning laws of Nevada County recently. I guess it's the Verizon NID.
You know, I'm going to have to stop you right there because we have a hearing this afternoon on that issue. So
okay, I won't.
I'm public comment is for people that wish to comment on items that do not appear on today's agenda.
Sure.
If you have different comments, that's fine, but otherwise I'm going to ask you to attend the hearing.
Why not just rewrite the laws? And just in closing, I pray that when you all, supervisors and staff, explain your job to our children of Nevada County, like recently here, that you can all look them in the eye and explain in all good conscience what is meant by equal interpretation and execution of our laws, and how that pertains to all citizens. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And staff.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment and proceed with the consent calendar. This morning's consent calendar, agenda items 2 through 18, consent calendar is usually routine and non-controversial, and the board will act upon them without discussion and in one motion. However, any member of the staff, the public, or the board has an opportunity to pull an item if they wish to pull. Does any member of the board wish to pull an item off of consent? Staff?
I just have one correction to item 9.
Okay.
On the resolution, on the last page where it talks about districts with insufficient candidates for the November 6th election, the resolution states Pleasant Valley Community Service District. That should be Pleasant Valley School District.
That's not 9, is it?
6.
6, I'm sorry, 6.
Okay. Does any member of the public wish to pull an item this morning? Is Mr. Parsons here?
Yes.
I got a note you wish to pull agenda item 9?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion on the consent calendar void of agenda item 9.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Roll call, please.
District 2,
Yes.
District 1,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 5.
Yes. And the motion carries. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you very much for making this exception. I know our agenda is very busy today, so I'll just make one brief statement on behalf of the San Juan Ridge Taxpayers Association. My name is Gary Parsons. I'm the president of that association. It's been on the San Juan Ridge since the early 70s. We're back here again to thank you, primarily, for realizing that this project is significant. The San Juan Ridge Mine is a significant project in terms of the impacts, the demonstrated impacts on the landowners up on the San Juan Ridge. The board's finding, along with staff and the Planning Commission, that a new EIR is required was greeted with great joy amongst our membership and other staff and people that we've hired in the process of preparing for this. Given the complexity of this project, the $179,000 that is being quoted as the beginning of this budget, I think we all just want to say that we realize that's a down payment. We understand that there's many to-be-determined costs. There's also hourly costs that may run over. The notion that, you know, $440,000, $535,000, IMGOL just paid $880,000 for the EIR. $179,000 at first brush seems quite low, but we understand that's a down payment. There are over 1,000 parcels within a 3-mile radius of the mine. These are privately held parcels. There's underlying geological faults and fracturing that relate all these parcels. The last time the mine came through in the mid-90s, the first report said that there would be no communication between the bedrock and the gravel beds that the applicant wants to mine. That proved to be false very quickly, and the county thankfully responded very strongly, requiring an additional environmental impact report that was paid for by the applicant and operator that demonstrated conclusively that there's tremendous levels of connection between the bedrock and the water-bearing gravels that we all depend on. So now here we are, 15 years later or so, and it's the same mine, it's the same hole, it's the same straw, it's the same problems. Last time we lost 14 wells, including the Grizzly Hills School. That poor school has not required and arguably has suffered, the school district itself has suffered damage because of those impacts that we've still not quite recovered from, if at all. So now the project is trying to prove a negative, to prove that the past is not prologue, that somehow this time it will be different. Well, the county and planning and staff realize that that is a very, very steep road to climb, and we would like to again thank you for understanding our concerns, understanding the terror, the anguish, the loss of property values, the general misery that affected specifically a few families and generally many families. It's an engaged electorate. People are galvanized. I wanted to introduce myself to you all. This is an ongoing long-range project. The level of public support demonstrably is significant. And so we look forward to working together with you, working together with staff, providing you with whatever information or expertise we can help generate, we can help find, to find a set of mitigations, if a set exists, that can make this project not detrimental to the quality of life on the San Juan Ridge. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to working with you over the next couple of years, and hopefully we can find a solution that's equitable to everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons.
Thank you.
Mr. Foss, if you wouldn't mind coming down to the microphone. This, just so that we're very, very clear, this is the very beginning of a brand new process, and if you could just give us a brief description of that so everybody in the room, including the board, hears the same thing at the same time.
Thank you. Good morning, supervisors. That's correct. This is just the beginning. We have received an application for the San Juan Ridge Mine and have decided that an EIR is necessary. Staff sent an RFP to 6 consulting firms. 5 of them responded with proposals. We reviewed the proposals and chose PMC based on their expertise and their experience with other mining projects, as well as their approach to this specific issue. And the contract before you today is to begin that EIR process. If there are complexities or other issues that arise, it's not necessarily the norm, but it's also not unusual that a contract amendment may come before your board if additional costs or issues need to be addressed. But this is just the beginning of the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report. There'll be other opportunities for public review of that document once the work begins. We'll also have notice of preparation, public meetings, as well as public meetings for review of the draft Environmental Impact Report, and ultimately meetings before the Planning Commission and your Board of Supervisors for project review and potential approval or consideration.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Before you go, does any member of the board have a question or comment for Brian or other?
Spelled it out.
Okay, thank you.
I do, actually.
Supervisor Lampier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everybody coming down here today. That's a haul from the ridge. And a few questions for you, Brian, since you're up. Just for the edification of our guests today, could you talk a little bit more about the public notification and public hearings as the process unfolds, what the opportunities are, and how people will learn about those?
The first step would be a notice of preparation hearing before we begin the Environmental Impact Report to gather information on the issues and the concerns of state agencies, public agencies, as well as the community and the public. The consultant would be there for that to listen to the concerns. We would notify the State Clearinghouse that we're preparing an EIR, take into account the comments that were received on the notice of preparation, work through an administrative draft of the Environmental Impact Report that would be reviewed internally by staff to ensure that we've addressed all the issues adequately based on the comments we received from the notice of preparation. Then the draft environmental document would be released for a minimum period of 45 days. At that time, public comment would be welcome verbally or written form. Within that 45 days, we would hold a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission to receive Planning Commission input as well as the public input, and the consultant would be there and respond to any and all comments that are received within at least that 45-day period. And then the final EIR would be prepared, which would be a combination of a response to all the comments received during the draft EIR period, as well as any errata or changes to the draft EIR based on comments that were raised during the circulation period.
Thank you, because obviously this didn't work so well the first time they were up there and caused some problems, so I'm sure people were really going to be watching this to be sure that this... Now, as regards the cost of the EIR, I noticed in our cover letter, funding will impact the planning department budget, expenses are paid by the project applicant. So if the applicant's paying, what would be the impact for the planning department?
The funds go into the planning department budget and then are paid out of the planning department budget. It's an exercise in numbers, essentially. It's not county or general fund dollars, it's the applicant dollars.
So it nets out zero for a cost of the county?
Correct.
I think the reason for that is that we're the ones who deal with the EIR contractor, right?
That's correct.
It's not between
we're the contract holder, and it's
Right.
not between the applicant, it's between the
I think
county
that
and the
needs to be
consultant.
emphasized, that the project applicant doesn't choose who does the EIR.
Correct.
Understood. And my last question, I was inferring from what I read here that basically the previous work had been done, EIR for this years ago. What's going forth, it won't be a completely brand new EIR. It's going to be kind of an update of what had been done before. Is that correct?
Supervisor Lampier, it will be a new EIR.
Completely new.
We will use any information that's available from the previous EIR, but that EIR is fairly old, and so whatever we can glean from it will benefit from, but we're not going to rely on outdated data, so it will all be a new EIR based on current information and current settings out there at the site.
And I'm guessing, but I don't know, that basically why people are here is because they felt like the previous version of this just didn't, when the proposal came forth and the analysis, EIR was done and so forth, there was something missing. And it did end up causing a lot of havoc up here. So I'm sure what we're looking for going forward is you can't anticipate everything, but a more expansive view of what's going on up there to look at things.
Certainly, the water issue, the groundwater issue and dewatering wells is paramount in this EIR. That was not anticipated or was anticipated to not be an issue the previous time. Obviously, it played out to be an issue, and so there will be some extensive analysis needed to understand the issue and prevent it from happening again if it moves forward.
Yeah, that's the end of my questions. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay. I didn't say that I closed public comment, so I'll allow it, but go ahead. You have a question or a comment? And after this, then we've had a vote.
Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Owens. So my name is Erin Noel, and I'm a resident who lives approximately 3 miles from the proposed mine and has lived all my life in Nevada County. And I wanted to make sure, because I just want to make sure that the supervisors, I'm well aware that that some of you are fully aware and apprised of what happened last time around, and also that the planning department is well aware, but I wasn't sure that we made clear that essentially what happened last time is that the San Juan Ridge Taxpayers Association and local residents were kind of promised that there would be no impacts to water quality. So the community group actually was willing to support the project with mitigation. So this isn't like a group of people who's just anti-mining, but it's a group of people who is totally willing to work with the mining applicant last time around. And what ended up happening is 15 wells were damaged, 12 of which went completely dry, including the school, our only local school well was completely dewatered, and when pumping stopped, it was infiltrated by toxic contaminants. So the well still does not pass safe drinking water standards. At this time, it has to be filtered to be consumed by children, and for 13 years, the kids were on bottled water. So right now, only 20% of that mining tunnel happened, and so what we're talking about is a tunnel that would pass directly adjacent to our medical clinic, the only medical clinic on the San Juan Ridge, directly adjacent to most of the major employers on the San Juan Ridge, including companies that provide over 200 jobs. So that's the basis of the concern, that what happened last time was so dramatic. It's not that we're against mining on the San Juan Ridge, but just that there's a large number of people who this mine is more than, it's hard to imagine a way that those problems could be fully addressed. So why we're saying that today is partly because this is the only opportunity we're having in the beginning of the process to address our full board of supervisors, but also because as the EIR proceeds, we want to make sure that with a fractured bedrock, an aquifer and fractured bedrock, that the analysis is complete enough so that that problem of just not understanding that a major problem could result, we want to make sure to avoid that this time around.
Understood. And I think after Mr. Foss gave his rundown, you all realize you're going to have more than ample opportunities, and many of them, to provide input and to question data. So
thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Supervisor Beeson has a comment, then I'm going to ask for a motion.
Yeah, Aaron's comments are well taken. Although none of us was on the board in the 90s, this whole process associated with the Idaho-Maryland mine has sensitized us to the well issue. In fact, the Siscon Gold experience has been raised over and over and over, and we're all pretty much aware of the concerns, and I myself particularly, because my district potentially could have some wells impacted should the Idaho-Maryland mine ever come to fruition. So I don't know if we can reassure you, but we're very sensitive to this, and the EIR will, it's one of these things, we go where the facts lead us, and that's what we have to do. But thanks for coming down.
Thank you. Would anyone care to make a motion at this time on the resolution authorizing to accept the deposit and establish the contract with PMC?
Mr. Chairman, I move the resolution.
Thank you. Second. I have a motion and a second. Mr. Weston. Roll call, please.
District 2,
Yes.
District 1,
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes, and the motion carries, and I also would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to come down here and express your concerns with us. It's very powerful and duly noted, so thank you. Do you need a moment, Allison, before we move to Department Head Matters, your item? Why don't we take a quick 2-minute, is that okay?
Sure.
Why don't we? Item 19 is an introduction and waive further reading of an ordinance amending Appendix 1 of Section A2, 22.3 of Article 22 of Chapter 2 of the Nevada County Administrative Code regarding the county's conflict of interest code. County Counsel Allison Barrett Green.
Good morning.
I read it into the record for you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Board of Supervisors. I was just wondering where all the attention went on this exciting topic. Every 2 years, the FPPC requires that we review our conflict of interest policy in our code and update it to reflect changes in staffing or changes in disclosure requirements. We have done that. I want to thank the department heads for providing input, and especially Susan Cadera in Human Resources for her work on this ordinance. And the proposed changes are before you. They're very straightforward and really are primarily focused on just updating the staff positions to reflect our current staffing levels.
We'll start with, go ahead. We'll start with Supervisor Lamphere. Any questions?
No questions.
Supervisor Weston?
No questions.
Supervisor Beeson? None. Supervisor Schofield? None. And I have none. It's very straightforward. I'd ask any member of the public if they have any questions, but that would be futile.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we waive further reading of the ordinance.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
District 2?
Yes?
District 1?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes. And the motion carries. Our next agenda item, Human Resources Director Gail Satchwell. Agenda item 20. We have a resolution, and then we have an introduction and waive further reading of an ordinance, and another resolution. You're going to cover all of these with us. Gail, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Chair Owen and members of the Board of Supervisors. Gail Satchwell, Human Resources Director. And the item before you today is a resolution of intention to approve amendment between the CalPERS Board and the county to amend the retirement contract. And the item is a result of our negotiations, our recent negotiations with Local 39, which established a new lower tier of pension of 2% at 60 with a 3% average calculation for the monthly allowance. And the new tier moved from 2.7 at 55 to the lower 2% at 60. And these resolutions are required by CalPERS in order to implement the contract amendment. Additionally, part of the negotiations included a change to the employer, the EPMC, the employer paid member contribution for existing employees, which is the employee share of pension. And as that's being phased out, CalPERS is requiring the county to implement resolutions which are attached and before you for consideration in order for that to be phased out as well. And then finally, there's a bit of cleanup on the tax-deferred resolutions that are included. CalPERS is requiring a different vehicle to continue with that particular resolution. So those resolutions are before you for consideration.
Well, we have resolutions and
Yes,
an ordinance.
and an ordinance before you for consideration, and they're recommended for adoption.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Donna, just to keep this easy for you, we've got 3 resolutions and an ordinance. Would it be okay if we take the resolutions first instead of one big, giant
Sure, you could do it that way.
motion? Are there
yeah.
any questions any member of the board might have?
Move the resolution.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir. Hold on just a second. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Supervisor Lamphere?
Good morning, Gail.
Good
So
morning.
this is basically just a ratification of the agreements that were made with various bargaining units here.
That is correct.
Thank you.
And the primary piece that we're looking at is the 2% at 60?
versus what it was at 2.7 at 55.
That's correct. It is establishing the new lower tier.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Garcia? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. If there are no more comments or questions, roll call on the three resolutions as presented.
District 2,
Yes.
District 1,
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 4.
Yes.
District 5.
Yes, and the motion carries. And then I'll ask for a motion on the introduction and waive further reading of the ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we waive further reading on an ordinance approving an amendment to the contract between the Board of Supervisors of the County of Nevada and the Board of Administration of the California Public Employees Retirement System to provide Government Code Section 20475, different level of benefits, Government Code Section 21353, 2% at 60 modified formula, and Government Code Section 20037, 3-year final compensation for local miscellaneous members.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Donna?
District 2,
Yes.
District 1.
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 4.
Yes.
District 5.
Yes. And the motion carries. Did I skip a resolution? Do we have 4?
Yes, 4. Looks like it.
Why don't we get
You did all of them.
3 plus 1.
3 plus 1?
Yeah.
Was that the intent of your motion? Okay. I misspoke. Thank you, Gail.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gail.
Are we ready for announcements?
Forgot my list.
And it's, Supervisor Weston.
Okay, let's see. Attended the LAFCO meeting, and we have another LAFCO meeting set up for next month. The biggest issue was an emergency annexation into the city of Nevada City for failing septic systems. I had 2 fire safe council meetings. They're exploring other alternatives on how to sustain their ability to provide the service in the county with the last year at least appearance of Title II money. I was the judge at the Rough and Ready Chili Cook-Off, and excellent chili, and the same 2 couples won again this year, only reversed. Instead of the husband winning, the wife won, and the husband came in second, so it was very good chili. Took a trip with Steve Castleberry, Public Works, to determine a emergency exit out of Perimeter Road. During a few months back, a tree went down, caused nobody could get out of Perimeter Road while they removed the tree. So we investigated to find out if we could come up with an emergency exit that would allow people on Perimeter Road to get over onto Wolf Road. We found a road but has a gate on it, and so we're going to follow through and see if we can come up with a system whereby that gate can be activated through emergency services to open it when there is an emergency. We'll be proceeding. I don't know where it'll go. It used to be an open road. New owner came in, put a gate in. Now I think we want to try and discuss the issue with them about making the gate more mobile so that people can get out. So we'll see. And that's it for me.
Supervisor Lanfear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a while. Well, since the last time we had public announcements, our local broadband group hosted, in conjunction with Gold Country Broadband Consortium, an event at the NU High School, which is an amazing facility. I'll remind the community once again that it is also considered a community center and is available for public use at very low costs. We had nearly 70 people show up for that, with vendors trying to help people get internet and what are the constraints going forward. So that was, we considered that a successful outing. Then later, with the Health and Human Services had an awards banquet to which I was attended, and I had the pleasure of introducing and awarding to Jose Gamino, a high school student, an award for his service to the community. This guy's a go-getter and a person to watch in the future. Still in high school, he has great potential going forward. Let's see, what else we have here. SEDCOR had a meeting, their monthly meeting, and this was hosted by our Nevada County Contractors Association at their facilities, and local contractors made a presentation that they had made basically a duplicate of what they'd given when the cities and the county had their joint meeting about economic development and jobs. Following that, Center for Performing Arts had their annual open house to showcase little tidbits of the varying talent we have in our community. That's always fun. It's a great institution. I'm very proud to have it in our community. We had a meeting with our new probation officer, department head, Michael Ertola. I think is a good choice for the job. Seems to be pretty sharp and on it. Had a couple of our local native Maidu tribes had events over a couple of weekends. One was the Chiakum down at the Sycamore Ranch. Great event, well attended. I had the privilege to be invited to speak briefly down there, which I personal reasons, I like a lot of the philosophy of our Native Americans and was happy to be a part of that. And the following weekend also attended the Nisanan's event in Nevada City and saw one night some of the amazing Indian art that has been done over the last few decades. It's just really beautiful stuff, none of which I could afford, but it's amazing stuff. We had a solid waste meeting. We had members of the public. One of the issues that was raised that I think bears looking into, if there's a way to do it, there is an opportunity to have waste management do on-call service versus a regular contract. It's not well advertised, and the concern was raised of cutting the traffic at our landfill transfer station by encouraging people to use the pickup on will call instead of driving their cars over there. I thought that was a good one. Hopefully we'll be able to figure out something on that going forward. And basically all they're asking for is notification to people when they come to the transfer station, a piece of literature and handouts to encourage them not to do that and use the will call system. Then I was also invited to be part of the fundraiser for the Nevada County Television, and that was a good party. There were many people from the community down at the Grass Valley parking lot. We had some local musicians, great talent down there, and I'm not sure what they ended up with, but I think it was in excess of 6,000 plus on that one day's event. So it was really good energy around that. It was great to be there. And I think that's it for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Schofield.
Well, I think the one meeting of importance that I attended was yesterday, and unfortunately missed you there, Mr. Owens. That was our air quality district
Couldn't
meeting.
have gotten here.
I know. It was difficult for other supervisors too. However, we
80 was closed at that.
yeah, we did distribute air quality grants. Can't tell you the number. Doesn't matter. They're air quality grants. And Nevada County had 5 projects that had been presented with about $30,000 more than what was available to us. And what we ended up doing was granting Hanson Brothers Enterprises, that was the first priority, a new vehicle for approximately $93,000. A pedestrian crossing on Magnolia Road into the schools and onto the trail system over there. And that was really brought up because the bus system no longer runs in Lake of the Pines. So this is an opportunity for the kids to come across. That was about $40,000. And the Fire Safe Council, approximately $25,000. The library had asked for 30, and we ended up giving them the remainder of 17. And the city of Grass Valley had asked for an electric vehicle, which we had denied. So it was an interesting meeting yesterday.
Supervisor Beeson.
Well, I forgot my list, but I can remember a couple things. Along with, I think, most of you, I went to the HHSA Community Partners Appreciation event. It was a good event, as usual. I'm always impressed with the type of people we have involved in in charge of the nonprofits in this county. I opened the Veterans Stand Down this month, Friday morning, a couple Fridays ago. And the turnout was pretty good, but it wasn't like it was in years past. I don't know why. Can't figure that one out. Met with constituents who want to put a gate. Hank was talking about gates. They want to put a gate on a road that we have for emergency access only, and I tried to explain to them that it wasn't really, there's no appetite for that sort of thing, particularly on a road that could be an emergency egress, and they were worried about trespassing, and I went and investigated the area, and the road's not the problem. They've got all this open access to their neighborhood that allows the trespassers in. And I offered that maybe the sheriff would be somebody they might want to contact should it happen again. And then I thought it was interesting, one of the ironies of life, the fellow down here earlier was, I think, was objecting to the possibility of the Verizon cell tower. And I know that he's been unhappy in the past because he doesn't have high-speed internet where he lives. And if you talk to the techies, they'll tell you that cellular communications might be one of the ways to get more broadband to our community. I just thought that was kind of interesting. And there's some other things, constituent meetings, but I just don't have my list with me. So thanks.
I'll be quick. LAFCO, constituent meetings, Truckee Redevelopment Agency Successor Oversight Committee. I think, Mr. Beeson, you would refer to something like that as a kabuki. It's a very bizarre machination created by the state. And I did have the pleasure of moderating several debate forums up in the East County, one for the Airport District Board, School District, and Town Council. And I was on vacation last week. It was great. It was sunny every day, 86, came back, 2 feet of snow. Life's great. So,
the 49er game and watched the Giants beat them.
I watched that over there. With that, we do have some closed sessions. If County Council would read us in.
Went to the Cal Stanford.
The first closed session is pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A. County Council is requesting a closed session to discuss the following existing litigation case: City of Bellflower et al. Versus Ana Mata Santos et al., Sacramento County Superior Court, case number 34-2012-8000169. The second item is pursuant to Government Code Section 54957B1. County Council is requesting a closed session for a public employee performance evaluation for the County Council.
Allison, if you would read us back in.
Nothing occurred in either of the closed sessions that is required to be reported out by law.
Okay, we will recess until our afternoon session, scheduled item at 1:30. Okay, the Board of Supervisors is back in session. Again, this is our regularly scheduled meeting, Tuesday, October 23rd, 2012. We have a scheduled item, a public hearing, to consider the appeal filed by Peter Lockyer and Juliet Erickson regarding the July 18th, 2012 Planning Administrator's decision. I'm not going to read the entire agenda there, but I do want to, a little housekeeping. If you have a cell phone, if you would please put it on vibrate or off. That would be good. The way the hearing procedures are going to work, just so everybody hears everything at the same time, is the first item that we will have is a staff presentation right here. The presentation by the appellant, which will be also 15 minutes. Is that correct? Your presentation?
More or less, yeah.
Okay, and then equal time, 15 minutes for the appellant. There is an opportunity for presentation by project proponent if different party than appellant, which would also be limited to 15 minutes. Is there someone here for that purpose? Okay. At that time, I will ask that the members of the board hold their questions. We'll move and open the public hearing for members of the public. Members of the public will be allowed 5 minutes in which to provide testimony before the Board of Supervisors. I will apologize in advance if I have to cut you off or wind you down. I'm going to try and adhere to the time as tightly as I can. When the public hearing is then closed, be a summation by the project proponent limited to not more than 10 minutes, summation by appellant 10 minutes, and a rebuttal by members of the public limited to 2 minutes each. And at that time, there'll be a staff summation, and then the board will engage in questions and deliberation. And with that, I will turn it over to staff for your presentation. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Supervisors. Todd Herman is here to give a presentation on the appeal, and then we'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Owens and members of the board. Again, this is the appeal of the amended permit referenced as AP 12-001, and also the initial study and a mitigated negative declaration that's associated with that, and that file number is EIS 12-005. Just by way of a brief background, after 2 previous design modifications on October 5th, 2011, the zoning administrator adopted a neg deck mitigated negative declaration and approved the use permit 11-003 and an area variance 11-001. That approval permitted the construction of the same 48-foot tall cellular tower and the equipment shelter on the north side of the NID water tanks, as well as within a second lease area, a backup generator and a fuel tank on the south side of the NID tanks. The proposed improvements on the north side, however, required a variance to reduce the 30-foot setback for the retaining wall down to 9.3 feet. That approval was appealed to your board last December, and the board ultimately upheld the approval pursuant to Resolution 11-550. The appellants, Peter Lockyer and Juliet Erickson, then filed litigation challenging that approval, which is still pending today. Meanwhile, Complete Wireless had renegotiated their lease with the Nevada Irrigation District and has applied for an amended permit, 12-001, proposing to relocate those northern improvements to the southern side of the NID water tank in a much larger lease area and in full conformance with the 30-foot setback requirements. On July 18th of this year, the zoning administrator approved that amended permit after considering the revised initial study and proposed mitigated negative declaration. The amended project essentially, again, relocates that cellular tower another 102 feet further to the south, maintains the same 48-foot height, and maintains the monopine appearance. And more importantly, it no longer requires the area variance. On July 27th, the neighbors again filed an appeal of that approval. Just by way of the project description, again, it's a 48-foot monopine cellular tower. It's going to be in the front of the NID tank as viewed from Pleasant Valley Road or on the south side. Again, all the equipment shelter buildings and everything are going to be combined and will also be on the front side as viewed or the south side of the NID tank. As no improvements will remain on the north side of the tank, the previously approved variance is no longer necessary. And again, the expanded lease area also provides future space for future cogeneration location options on the same tower. So not a second tower site, but basically another cell phone carrier provider to put their equipment cabinets and hang their antenna on the same tower. Again, here's just a quick overview of the 2 lease areas of the previous one, and that's changed to a much larger lease area on the southern. If we zoom in a little closer, the lease area is outlined in red on that map. Again, the lease area is no closer than 30 feet from the adjacent property line. The green area, which is probably very difficult to see, is the equipment shelter up on top. All the telecommunications equipment will be located on the western side, and the backup generator will be located on the eastern side, this time within a fully enclosed structure rather than a 3-sided retaining wall feature. There'll be a walkway in the front of that because of this equipment shelter building is on a gentle side slope, so that walkway will be necessary to reach the 2 access doors, which will be on the southern side. Again, there will be in a detached location, there will be a propane tank for the generator, as the generator is not diesel. And the cell tower, again, will be just south of that. So the cell tower in part will shield part of the equipment shelter building. It'll have 3 antenna arrays just like the previous design, and it will be disguised to look like a monopine. And then the lease area I mentioned is in the southernmost portion of that property. And again, the The site will take advantage of the fiber optic cable that's available from Pleasant Valley Road, as well as power from the PG&E, and both of those will be undergrounded to this facility. In profile view, you can tell that the base elevation of this tower is now at the 1660 elevation. That is 3 feet below the grade of the water tanks and about 6 feet below the grade of the prior base elevation. So in effect, the overall height of that cell tower will be 6 feet lower in elevation. It'll still be 48 feet tall, but just by way of reference, there was some confusion in the recent newspaper story, but the top of the tank is at 1688, and the baseline of the ridge behind, the ground level of the ridge behind, is at 1692, and then the top of the cell tower is at 1708. That 16-foot difference is intended to be made up by the vegetation behind the site. So the appeal essentially raises two parts. First is the challenge of the environmental document, and the appeal alleges that this document fails to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. And then, of course, the second part of the appeal is the actual discretionary action for the amended permit. And again, the appeal cites that they believe that this approved permit is in violation of Section 3.8, which is the zoning ordinance's communication towers and facilities regulations. So for part one, with regard to the environmental document, the appeal argues, seems to be focused that the tower is going to have a visual impact on the public views. And the appeal also cites that this application needs to comply not only with the standards from Section 3.8 applicable to communication towers, but it also needs to comply with Section 4.316, which is applicable to development along visually important ridge lines. With regard to the visual impacts, again, this existing setting is developed with 2 NID water tanks. The surrounding area is a rural residential area with a 10-acre zoning density. And the nearest proposed residential structure, and that's proposed structure, is about 183 feet away from the new tower site. It used to be only 97 feet. Again, the project does retain the monopole tower. It's 6 feet lower in overall elevation, and it is designed to blend with the surrounding equipment as well as the vegetation. With regard to, this is the a view, a zoomed-in view of the proposed tower as it was previously located behind the tank. You can now see that it's been shifted to the front of the tank, and from the same view, this tower now, you can see the equipment shelter is just barely visible from that tank on the right-hand side. Although the same view is taken from the normal perspective, as viewed from Pleasant Valley Road, is actually quite a ways in the distance and much smaller on the horizon. And the highlighted area shows where that cell tower is proposed. With regard to visual impacts, Section 4.316 applies to development of top visually important ridge lines, and if the proposed development is deemed to impact the visual quality of that ridge line, a management plan is therefore required. And again, the intent of that section is to require screening to hide the development and protect the integrity of the visually important ridge line. However, the important difference with communication towers is more to design it to blend with the ridge line. By design, a tower needs to be able to broadcast and basically have a line of sight for its receivers. So by putting a tower behind a solid wall or a solid feature kind of negates the whole purpose of a communication facility. So the zoning ordinance recognizes that, and it has a clear distinction between doing the best it can to blend that facility with the backdrop as opposed to completely hide that facility. So those are the major differences between those two sections within the zoning code. Notwithstanding, the communication tower is not subject to 4.3.16, and all communications towers do require a use permit, which effectively trumps a management plan. So the CEQA document does not fail to identify this as a land use issue, nor did it fail to document the design features within the tower and the colors proposed would minimize the adverse visual impacts to a less than significant level. That's again minimizing the visual impacts and not hiding or completely making this tower invisible. That's not the intent. The required CEQA findings are therefore supported in the record of this permit application. With regard to the second part of the appeal, this one again challenges specific points within 3.8 of the communication towers and facilities part of our zoning code ordinance. And this argument appeals to focus on the single issue that it is possible to find locations where small portions of the top of the tower can be viewed in such a way to appear to silhouette against the sky. The appeal also again tries to argue that the application did not follow the required provisions of all of the provisions of 3.8. So to get into the silhouette against the sky, during the zoning administrator hearing, the neighbors submitted their own photos showing somewhat differing views than what the photo simulations that were submitted by the applicant. These views depicted a much broader gap in the vegetation behind the tower than was previously shown in the prior photo simulations from the various versions of this application over the years. Their application then tends to focus that no new tower shall be placed on an exposed ridgeline or to silhouette against the sky unless the site is developed with existing communication facilities, which it is not. So again, the question comes up, does this tower really silhouette against the skyline? Here were the appellant's zoomed in views, and in this particular perspective, you can clearly see that the top of the tower, as viewed in the zoomed in area, does protrude above that tank, and there is blue sky behind it. Here's another view kind of depicting that same thing. If you compare their view with the applicant's view, take note of the vegetation that's behind that right-hand tank, and for some reason the view has seemed to expand, and I've highlighted those two areas where that changes. Well, it appears there's been some recent vegetation modification that has occurred on the appellant's property that is opening up that view line again. So the planning department nevertheless interprets that the intent of this provision is to preclude the placement of new towers on top of exposed ridge lines without any form of camouflage, or to allow the structure to not blend with its background. And examples of what the land use code is trying to avoid, here's a view taken from Bear Valley looking up at the ridge. This fortunately is in Placer County. But here's a cell tower that's prominently on top of an exposed ridge line. Its idea is to serve Interstate 80, which runs parallel with this ridge line. But this is basically what our code tries to avoid. And to be fair, here's a tower that's off of Cameo Drive in the southern part of Nevada County. So, and this is an older tower facility that went up before our current code standards, which were first put into place in July of 2000. But again, this is what we are trying to avoid. Again, unless it blends with the surrounding existing natural or man-made environment, so to be effectively unnoticeable. Again, unnoticeable as opposed to invisible. Regardless of whether this ridge line is defined as a constant line across the average skyline or a specific line following each undulating feature, the zoning administrator did find that the tower still blends with its backdrop and is no taller than the height of the adjacent vegetation, even after recent attempts to alter that vegetation backdrop. And thus, so there's two perspectives. Here's a view if you consider the skyline as being an undulating line following everything. The tower is circled in blue this time, and yeah, there's a little point of it that does appear above that red line, but adjacent to that red line there are other features that are taller in the skyline. Another way to interpret that tower would be to just do a constant line across the average, where there are some natural features that occur above and some below. But in either situation, the zoning administrator found that the overall height of the tower was not prominently above the skyline and felt that it was designed in such a way to blend with the vegetation. This photo, by the way, was provided by the appellants, and you can see that the tower is designed to kind of fit with the surrounding vegetation. Again, the 3.8 requirements also appears to argue the justification for the tower site again, based on the analysis of other sites. as this proposed amended permit only changed the location of the tower and the equipment shelter, thus eliminating the need for the variance. The prior appeal had already basically concluded that this justification for the tower site was met, and your board upheld that determination. So the short version is we didn't go into questioning or re-evaluating the justification for this site, since the site's basically already been approved for this type of a use. Therefore, the zoning administrator's approval of the amended permit only focuses on the changes between the original use permit and the amended permit. Those changes include the relocation of the tower, the merging of the ancillary uses, and the abandonment of the northern lease area, thereby removing the need for the variance. And based on that evidence, and with the prior board decision to uphold the previous project, the alterations of the amended project do lessen the impact on the neighboring property, and that the amended permit approval is supported by the findings in record of the July 18, 2012 staff report. So again, this photo just sort of exemplifies where the nearest proposed structure is and the location of the two tower sites. The one on the southern end is what's being proposed. So staff is recommending that you adopt a modified resolution denying this appeal and uphold the decision of the zoning administrator to approve the amended permit and the adoption of the mitigated negative declaration. And I'm wondering if that amended resolution has been provided to the board.
It has.
Yes, okay, good. Just as an aside, on Friday, October 9th, a mock tower was placed on the NID site using a cherry picker that hung a 40-foot pole, and then on top of that basically put something like a Christmas tree in the basket to kind of emulate what the girth of the structure might look like. Staff visited the site and took some additional photos of that to provide some current views of what that proposed facility may look like. And I'll note that in the past 2 weeks, staff has received 0 phone calls questioning that tower or that structure being up there. So it's arguable as to whether or not anyone has noticed it. And I just have a couple views of where that proposed cherry picker and the tower site can be viewed. So some of these photos were taken by the county surveyor, who did go up and verify the height of the proposed tower facility, and some were taken by myself and county council when we went out and visited the site. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you. And this is the opportunity for presentation by the appellant, also limited to 15 minutes. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Chairman Owen. My name is Alan Haley, and I represent the Lockyers. The point I want to stress here, and why we're here on this appeal, is that, as we all know, we are a government of laws, not of men, and we ask only that the county follow the laws. The Lockyers are perfectly in favor of improved cell tower service in Lake Wildwood, but they don't want it done at the expense of violating the laws in such a way that it adversely impacts them and the value of their property. It's simple to follow the laws. This application, for 2.5 years, the cell tower they've proposed has jutted above the skyline of the ridge line there in violation of the primary ordinance on location of cell towers, the one that Todd showed you just a minute ago, 3.8, that says, and staff, I have to say, has continually moved the goalposts in the course of this application. They've applied varying definitions of what is the ridge line, but he just blurred the statutory distinctions there in his presentation because he doesn't focus on the one thing that says no new cell tower shall be placed upon an exposed ridge line or so as to silhouette against the sky. Those are disjunctive requirements. Either one applies to the case if it actually can apply. It's not combined. So we have, and also in those words I just quoted, you can see the fallacy in defining the ridge line as he does to be the tree line. It's never the tree line. Because otherwise this ordinance saying no new cell tower shall be located on an exposed ridge line would make any sense if that meant the tree line. Of course the tree line's not exposed. The ridge line, if it can be exposed, means the ground level. And that's the way it's consistently always been meant and applied in county ordinances. It makes no sense to have as ephemeral a standard as whatever the tree line is from time to time be whatever is the defining legal standard for all the county officials to follow. Trees come and go, and trees change, and they're ephemeral. As I say, it's the ground ridge line is the only standard. This, together with the other ordinance that definitely applies, he's giving you false law when he says that the other statute, the other ordinance on visually important ridge lines just doesn't apply to this visually important ridge line. Staff themselves made the determination that this is a visually important ridge line for purposes of the land use code based on the previous appeal. They are bound by that now, and they can't just walk away from it and say that, well, this ordinance doesn't apply. They both apply, and a court's going to look at them both together and harmonize them so that they both come into play. And that second ordinance says quite clearly, no part of any roof line or other structure, and they've used the word structure in their report to define what this cell tower is, or other structure shall be above the ridge line of a visually prominent ridge line. So you have to put both requirements together. This tower, as they just showed you, is 18 feet above that visually prominent ridge line. It's a flat-out violation of the ordinance. And staff has bent the requirements and made room for Verizon's papers and applications, despite all the deficiencies that I pointed out to you in my written letter sent to you before the hearing. And just to show and emphasize these photos from the test conducted last Friday, the 12th, I'd like to submit at this time some additional photographs to the county clerk, which would just become part of the record. They're additional photos that we took from various locations, both in Lake Wildwood, both in Lake Wildwood and outside of Lake Wildwood. But there are other provisions that staff didn't quote to you saying that you're not supposed to be able to see the cell tower from any public place, public recreation place in Lake Wildwood, unless it sufficiently blends in with the vegetation and is not prominent. Well, there's pictures there and I have to stress, these pictures that I'm submitting are for both of these appeals. I will be referring to some of them later on in the second appeal. But there's only a couple of here that apply to the case at hand, and that would be, for example, the second one in the group I'm handing you there, which is the view from across the bridge, across the bridge on Pleasant Valley Road. And then the third one is a view from Gold Country Drive and Pyrite Court, just outside of Lake Wildwood. The fourth one shows a view from the other side at Wildwood Heights at the intersection of Rimrock Drive. And the fourth one shows the view from Commodore Park inside Lake Wildwood. That's the one that you get when you come into the second entrance, and it's on the right. It's also called, I think, Bugler Cove and so on, but it's Commodore Park is the sign there. And so, and previously I gave you a photograph attached to my letter which would show the view of the tower from the second gate of Lake Wildwood itself. So these are all illustrating how this is a tower that violates county ordinance, and there should be no question about this, and why staff 2.5 years ago did not tell Verizon, no, you come up with a different location. This ridge line is too prominent and you can't go above it. The other deficiency that I want to stress in this presentation that I think we've shown to you is with the letter that we submitted from Rusty Monroe of the firm that does all the consulting for counties across the country on evaluating cell tower applications. And Mr. Monroe pointed out the complete inadequacy of the data that has been furnished to you to date and to staff to date by Verizon to enable a meaningful evaluation of the alternatives. So what is staff's response to that? They say, oh, well, you can't reconsider the alternatives because they're not at issue on this appeal. Once again, I beg to differ, and I think the court's going to differ as well when this gets to court. You have to consider the alternatives because Verizon itself put the thing in issue by submitting a revised alternatives analysis with its amended application. In that, they made arguments about co-location arguments that we had made previously. They purported to show why they couldn't co-locate on any towers. That was brand new stuff inserted for the first time in this proceeding. And it is nonsense for you to say, for them to tell you that you cannot consider it. We have shown with the letter of Mr. Monroe that even with that presentation, it's still, you can't make a balanced judgment as to the alternatives because they use such different data, such different scaling of their maps. And without telling you what's the meaning of good signal level, moderate signal level, poor signal level, there's no there with which to base the evaluation of their analysis against anything objective. And for that reason, Mr. Monroe stressed that of all the thousands of applications he's worked with over 15 years, he's only had to recommend turning down 3, but this would be the 4th. I submit that's very substantial evidence to show that the application is deficient and you should be sending it back. Finally, and we'll be coming to this, of course, on the second appeal a lot more, but I want to stress the disparate treatment that the Lockyers have received versus the way Verizon has been received. Planning staff has gone out of its way, as I say, throughout this proceeding to bend the law, to muddle the law, to not give you a clear picture of what the law is, and every time we've had to go to court and get it straightened out at our expense. The county should not be proceeding this way. The county should not put private citizens to such burden and expense simply to uphold its laws. And thank you very much. I will have more to say in the summation.
Thank you, Mr. Haley. Now is the time for presentation by project proponent, if present. And again, that will be for 15 minutes. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Alex Sketsy. I'm representing Verizon Wireless, and I wanted to go over primarily 4 things with you in my abbreviated presentation before I turn it over to some other folks that have come as well. The 4 things are, first, I wanted to give you a brief background. Secondly, to discuss the community support for this project. Thirdly, to briefly go over the modifications that we are making through this application. And then lastly, to introduce the team of folks that is here that can answer questions you may have regarding the facility. So first of all, the background. As has been noted, we've been working with the county on providing the necessary coverage for service in the Lake Wildwood area for the past 2.5 years, working with the NID for about the last 4 years. So you might be asking, why are we back here? And I think that this was discussed certainly in staff's discussion, and actually, well, I should have taken the opportunity earlier, that it was a very thorough report, and thank you very much for putting that together. It makes my job a lot easier. And so after the last Board of Supervisors approval about a year ago, as you know, the project was, the county, Verizon, and NID were all sued by the Lockyers. And it was apparent that the variance was central in the lawsuit, and as such, we figured out a way to resolve the dispute without going into the expense of litigating the variance. And so why didn't we go here in the first place? This may be a question that you were asking. And the bottom line is that 4 years ago, this was an area due to the up-in-the-air nature of the tank expansion and other facilities that were going to be on this very small parcel. It just wasn't an area that was available for development by the NID. Since then, they've actually done a great job of further zooming in on their plans and finalizing areas, and have now been able to make this area available just earlier this year. And so that's why we're here. So let's talk a little bit about community support. It's really been overwhelming at this particular site. In your packets, there's an affidavit that talks about we've received 268 text messages from local area residents that are supporting the project. We've gotten 83 emails. I know I've spoken with, and I think that the Penn Valley Fire Chief is here, we've talked about the need for better service in this area. Nevada County Sheriff and the Nevada City Police Department are all Verizon users. And in addition, I personally spoken with area residents that are clamoring for the service. These are people that can't make phone calls in their homes. They're having to go out to their gardens or down the street in order to even get any sort of signal to make a voice call. All right, so the third point is just the modification. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I think that the visuals were perfect, and the bottom line is that the site is moving about 100 feet to the south. Other than that, it's the same project that was here before you. It was a little bit of decrease in ground elevation, but we made the concession to keep the pole the same height and not increase the height of the pole because we lost the ground elevation. And so everything is otherwise identical. And then, so lastly, if I could just, by a show of hands, have folks raise their hand here. I wanted to introduce Jim Hurd. Jim Hurd's legal counsel for Verizon Wireless. Mark Epstein, he's legal counsel for American Tower. And Doug Picard, who is the radio frequency engineer with Verizon Wireless. Verizon's real estate specialist, Molly Kales. Verizon's director of area real estate, Peter Mossart. And also we have Don Carmichael from Previsualist. He's the person that's responsible for the photo simulations that that digitally add the tree to the pole. He also supervised the installation of the cherry picker and the Christmas tree that was installed at the top of that. And all these people are available should you have any questions of them. I'll close off my initial discussions, and basically, in conclusion, we've shown, and we showed this a year ago, that there's a gap in service here. We all know that. That's been established. If you don't approve this modification, then we'd simply go forward with the existing approval that we have at the old site, but I would really encourage you not to do that. I think that this modification is just all around better. It's a better location, it avoids the need for the variance, and it still leaves us with the best design and now the best location. So with that, I encourage you to approve your zoning administrator's approval and deny the appeal that's before you today. With that, I'm going to turn my time over to Mr. Hurd, and he's going to address some issues with you as well. And if you have any questions, I can either stay up here or you can call me back.
We'll keep with the time. And
yes, sir.
Got nine more minutes.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm Jim Hurd from the law firm McKinsey & Albritton, representing Verizon Wireless. And I would like to begin by once again thanking your staff for the detailed and thorough report and their presentation today. And we certainly concur with their recommendations and with the findings of the zoning administrator that the proposed amendment meets all the requirements for approval, and would urge you to approve it. And we submitted a detailed letter responding to the various points in the appeal. Given the limited time, I don't propose to go through point by point. I did, however, want to hit a few high points. The argument that this tower violates the ridgeline regulations really doesn't make any sense. I will agree with Mr. Haley in one respect. There are two alternative requirements under the operative regulation. The first is that the tower cannot be on an exposed ridgeline, and there's obviously no issue with that here because this tower is not on the ridgeline and the ridgeline is not exposed. It's largely covered with trees, despite the fact that there has been some strategic tree cutting going on. The second requirement is that the tower not silhouette against the sky. And the key issue, of course, is how you define silhouette against the sky. And we believe that your staff and the zoning administrator, and in fact, this board, in your decision last December, have followed the correct approach. And that is a common sense focus on the aesthetics of the ridgeline. And under that approach, the key issue, as your staff have explained it so well, the key issue is, does the tower blend in so that it appears to be a natural feature of the ridgeline? And I would submit to you that that standard is met here. That's shown in the photo simulations. It's been confirmed by planning staff, by the county council apparently in visits to the area, and with the mock-up in place, and by the zoning administrator in his decision. Now, we noted that Mr. Haley submitted some last-minute photographs. We haven't seen those, but we do have a set of photographs that were prepared by Mr. Carmichael, who also prepared the photo simulations, and I would like to enter those into the record as they show the actual appearance of the mock-up, or the cherry picker, we're calling it, from the various vantage points that I understood to be an agreed list of locations that included Mr. Haley's input as to the preferred locations. But the bottom line here is we're not asking you to take our word for this. I'd ask you simply to consider the input from your own constituents, over 350 of whom have sent emails and text messages in support. And I'd like to call your attention to one of those in particular, because he does address this question of sort of dueling photographs. This is an email from Mark Hadley that's in the record, but I have extra copies for your convenience. Now, Mr. Hadley had quite a few things to say about the reasons he supported this tower, so I'm not going to read the whole email, but as you'll see when it reaches you, the second highlighted passage, he says, "I was approached by a neighbor with a petition against the project who showed me an out-of-scale drawing that did not take into consideration the overall scope of the entire area, that greatly exaggerated the visual impact of this pole in order to get signatures against the project. This needs to be taken into consideration as you review the opposition to this project. Thank you." Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Now, we concur with staff that the alternatives analysis is not within the scope of this hearing. And I noted Mr. Haley's argument that we somehow opened the door by responding to a point they had made in an earlier appeal by addressing a supposed alternative that they had suggested. But the bottom line is your code says that the issues in this appeal are limited to those that are affected by the amendment. Well, the amendment is moving the pole down the hill and enclosing the generator completely within a building. And that has no bearing on off-site alternatives, so we have not reopened that issue. In any event, the alternatives analysis was exhaustive. It analyzed 21 alternatives in total, and at the 11th hour, we get a couple of reports from consultants for the appellants who supposedly want to re-engineer the Verizon wireless network for us. But I would submit to you that the paid opinions of a couple of non-engineers do not constitute substantial evidence on the technical issues presented by the alternatives analysis. How am I doing for time? I'm not clear on that.
You've got 3.
Pardon me?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, thank you. Okay. And I'd like to respond briefly to this general attack on Verizon's credibility. I would suggest to you in response that the real issue is the credibility of the appellates themselves. They claim to be concerned about ridgeline views, but they're the ones who have been removing trees from the ridgelines. Mr. Haley used the phrase, "trees come and go." I think that speaks volumes. And now, at this late date, this far down the road, they're seriously telling you that Verizon Wireless doesn't have a real coverage problem in this area? And in the first place, that argument really isn't on the table today because of the limited scope of the appeal. But more importantly, it's simply absurd, given this record, to be claiming that Verizon Wireless does not have a real coverage gap in Lake Wildwood. And again, you don't need to take our word for this. I would ask you just to consider the evidence from your own constituents, those 351 text messages and emails that are in your packet. And I'd like to read once again from one of those in particular. This is an email from Angelina Brown. And again, this is in the record, but for your convenience, I've got copies that I'd like to hand to the clerk. Now, Ms. Brown says, "I completely support this. We need it. I personally have had issues with call drops, not able to receive calls, even not able to text message. Recently, I had an emergency and had to drive to the Lake Wildwood gate just for service. A couple months ago, my husband was in an accident where his big rig caught fire, and as well as a car, and I couldn't receive the call till after I tracked down the caller because of no service. Please, for the safety of residents and for emergency response teams, I urge you to put this through. Thank you, Mom of Two." I think that's all that needs to be said about the question whether there's a coverage gap here. I think there really is no legitimate question about that. And that's all I have to say, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Okay, at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. This is an opportunity for members of the public to share with the board their views and their comments and issues that they may raise. Please state your name for the record. Every member of the public will be afforded up to 5 minutes. It's perfectly acceptable if you agree with a prior speaker to simply indicate that for the benefit of time. But you are more than welcome to share your comments as you see fit. So the public hearing is now open. Please state your name for the record. And again, I will apologize in advance as your time comes to a close if I have to cut you off.
Good afternoon. Deja vu. Dear County Supervisors, County Council, and staff, my name is Steve Orlick, and I'm in Nate Beeson's district, District Number 1. And I'm a landowner, and we recently re-elected Mr. Beeson to another supervisor's term. And during his re-election campaign, I don't recall Mr. Beeson addressing his constituents on why he voted to allow the variance on the zoning laws in Nevada County. I think it would be interesting to know why. It would seem that you might have interpreted the zoning laws selectively in favor of one party over the other when you approve that variance. One might beg to ask the hypothetical question going forward, if my neighbor wants to build a chicken coop to produce eggs to sell at the Nevada City Farmers Market, and that coop is within 9 feet of my property, will he no longer have to prove hardship? Or is it up to me to prove to you and your zoning department that it's financially a detriment to the resale value of my property? To all you supervisors, why not just rewrite the laws, giving preferential treatment to businesses over private landowners and the general public, and be done with it? I pray that when you supervisors and your staff explain your job to our children of Nevada County during a civics or a poli-sci class outing to our Rood Center, you can look them in the eye and explain, all in good conscience, what is meant by equal interpretation and execution of our laws and how that pertains to all citizens. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm David Rubialis. I live on John Bourne Road in Penn Valley. I'm not qualified to speak to the legal issues here, but I think I do know when there's some disingenuous going on in reference to this issue. We've heard quite a bit about safety, and if I were in a situation where I felt my residence or my family was at risk, and someone came to me and said, we can solve the problem by putting a tower right next to your house, I would probably agree to that. And so I'm wondering then, why haven't the residents of Wildwood agreed to that? There have been proposals in the past to put towers in Wildwood, and they have rejected that. Then, if that's the case, and we know that they have rejected that 10 years ago and as recently as 4 years ago, then just how grave of a safety issue do we have? It can't be that big. They want better reception. Well, I would want better reception too. And again, if someone said we can give you better reception if we put a tower in your residential zone, I would agree to it if I really wanted better reception. But the residents of Wildwood have rejected that. So there's some disingenuousness going on here regarding whether or not is there really a safety issue. Well, I think there could be, but then put it in Wildwood. That's where it belongs. Those are the folks who say they have a safety issue. Is there a reception issue? Probably, but then put it in Wildwood. Those are the people who say they have a reception issue. They want to shift the burden to others of us, right, and stick it to us rather than accept that responsibility themselves. And I don't understand that. I'm not against Wildwood folks. I have many friends in Wildwood, but really, isn't it time for them to accept responsibility for their own situation? Put the tower in Wildwood. Or you could put the tower at the water treatment plant. That's already an unsightly place. We could add a tower there and it wouldn't make too much difference. Okay. So there's also NID facilities in Wildwood itself. You could put the towers there. So I would like to know why the folks in Wildwood don't want to have the tower in their, whatever you call it, Wildwood residence or whatever. It doesn't make any sense to me, and that's not been explained as far as I can tell. So, and if we're concerned about somebody might say, well, it's not as good a place to put it in terms of reception or broadcasting the signals. That's never been explained either. Apparently, it was an excellent place to put it 10 years ago. It was an excellent place to put it 4 years ago, but now suddenly it's not a good place to put it. That makes no sense either. There's quite a few inconsistencies here, and I think folks need to take responsibility for what they want in terms of better reception or better safety. Okay? So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Legales.
My name is John Nelson. I live in Wildwood Heights. Quite a cast of thousands over here from Verizon. It's quite impressive. It's kind of like going up against the tobacco companies in the 60s. I'd like to talk a little bit about transparency. I think we have a right to expect transparency from our public officials, including all you folks and everybody up and down your chain of command. I think when we don't get transparency, we have a right to demand it. I would hope you agree with me about that, and I should define what I mean by transparency. It could be a subjective term, open to a lot of confusion. I'm very clear and simple in what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your top priority needs to be enforcement of the law, following the rules and regulations. As I understand it, that's your primary job. That comes over creating jobs, all the good things that people want when they come before you. There's always going to be two sides, and you're usually going to make at least one side unhappy in your ruling. But you have a safe out. It's the safe choice, the ethical choice, the moral choice, and the legal choice, and that's to stay with the law. That's above providing cell coverage. That's above providing jobs. That's above protecting home values. That's above everything else, I think. You have to go follow the law. If you do not follow the law, from where I sit, I don't see transparency. I see you choosing to do something else anyway. And when I see that, I don't see what goes on behind closed doors. It makes me suspicious. I can't prove anything. It just doesn't look right. So why is transparency so important? Why does it matter? I can give a better example of it than the telecom industry because that's a little bit close. It hasn't played itself out yet in history, but we do have an example that has played itself out much more thoroughly in history. And there's more agreement, consequently. But it's a very similar battle. That is the tobacco industry. In the 60s and beyond, it was easy to find doctors that said smoking was healthy. You could look in medical journals and see all kinds of ads for cigarettes. You could find studies that purported that tobacco smoking was harmless, was healthy. Now, those studies happen to have been funded by the tobacco industry. There was no transparency. It took a long time to work through that one due to lack of transparency. The tobacco industry, the tobacco companies were amateurs compared to the telecom industry. You would have been shocked and outraged and thought it not possible for the tobacco industry to get laws passed that made it not a legal question that you could take up if smoking was unhealthy. And further, if they used their control, their power, to prevent research being done in that area. Well, that is exactly what's happened with the telecom industry. In 1993, the EPA had the world's foremost research laboratory. About the time that the Telecom Act was passed, it was defunded. Part of the Telecom Act agreement that was made with the telecom industry was that they would spend $25 billion studying if there were any harmful effects from the radiation from cell towers and from cell phones. That money was never spent. That research was never done. Do you know how many research projects are going on in America today on this subject? Zero. The only studies, the only research that's done is funded by this industry for their purposes. We saw what happened with that with the tobacco industry. So the telecom industry doesn't write our local laws. We're okay. We can at least enforce our local laws, right? Well, not exactly. What if you folks wind up carrying water for the telecom industry? From my perspective, from where I sit, I see a lot of that going on, in this case and in others. In that case, you can make it very difficult for us. If homeowners wind up on the right side of the law, but on the wrong side of someone that wants to do something, as in this case, they can have to put up all the funding to fight that battle. And if they lose, the rules can be shifted a little bit for whatever reason, and they don't get their court costs back, even though they win, rather.
Mr. Nelson,
yeah.
You've got about 20 seconds. I apologize for interrupting.
I thought you told me I had 5 minutes.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Well, I thought I've gone about 2.5 minutes. Okay. There's no ambiguity. Pardon? Oh,
I didn't say anything.
I don't think there needs to be ambiguity with the law. I think it's usually pretty clear, and if it's not, you guys can get to the bottom of it. I don't think I'm overestimating you in thinking that you can get to the bottom of it and find out what the law really says and not have this he said, she said. In our one of these last meetings, Hank Weston said, because it all looked so much like Verizon was spinning things and beyond spinning, Hank Weston said, and he was reflecting my thoughts, if you guys are spinning this and manipulating the data, shame on you, pretty much. And there were other comments like that. Someone said, this is a he said, she said, we're not going to resolve it. Someone else said that he hoped Verizon would treat the neighbors well. If he really feels that way about Verizon, he doesn't know who he's dealing with. I suggest you get a documentary called Full Signal. You can get it online and download that and look at it. It'll tell you more about Verizon than Verizon employees know. I guess I'll have to wrap it up with that.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I would like to make one more comment. At the bottom of all this is when you are making decisions, never, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'm going to rule on this side anyway. If in the back of your mind you've got an anyway, you're not going with the law, you're going with an agenda.
Mr. Nelson, thank you.
Okay.
I let you go a little longer because I interrupted. I apologize. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Hadley. Actually, I didn't know this, but my letter was quoted a little earlier. I'm a resident of Wildwood Ridge, which is outside of Lake Wildwood, and actually the tower in question, it would be behind my home by several, I don't know, a distance. Anyway, the things I would like to express are the following, that as I said, the first I heard about this project is a neighbor came to my house looking for signatures to oppose the project, and I looked at the basically what was a sketch of what he proposed, and in my opinion was very out of scale. For one thing, it didn't show the entire ridge line. It just basically showed the water tower with this gigantic pole sticking up. And I really believe in gathering signatures opposing the project. It really wasn't a genuine representation of the reality, especially of the ridgeline as we talked about. I'm a little disappointed in the conspiracy theories that I've heard today, having not been a part of any of these hearings beforehand. I trust that, and it seems to me you've done a very thorough job of examining the law as to what a ridgeline looks like. We have several trees that come up from the ridgeline. There would be, in my opinion, it's next to two very large water towers. As far as a visual nuisance, I just don't kind of get it in some ways as to how we figure that another tree, which does not stick up above these trees on the ridgeline next to water towers, imposes a visual nuisance. Within my own neighborhood, I would say that the very top third cannot even see the water tower from where they are. And then belowhand, again, you see a nice long ridge line, and it doesn't seem to impair or it's, in any way be what I would consider to be a visual nuisance. Although I respect the opinion of those that perhaps would have to look at this. The way our neighborhood is designed, most of the houses are basically, all of our streets go somewhat parallel. There are very few homes that actually face this area, where people would be looking out their front window and seeing this anyway. Very, very few, except for the very third part that can't see it at all. And as far as addressing the need for cell phone coverage, I have Comcast. There are times that Comcast has gone down, which means that my phone service completely leaves. And I rely on my cell phone in cases of emergency or just to be able to contact people. It is intermittent. It does drop calls. Sometimes I cannot get through. I am concerned about that for my family, for other elderly people that live within Lake Wildwood. I have several friends that have expressed the fact of not being able to get cell phone coverage. I also think it's an economic issue. Many people would like to be able to drop their landline and have exclusive use of cell phone coverage, and I think we deny that by not giving them good, strong cell phone coverage in our area. So I think there's a great need for it. I think there are a few people, very vocal minority, that represented here, and I respect them for that. But the benefit to thousands of people within the Lake Wildwood community of being able to have adequate cell phone coverage, to me, when you weigh that against what they would say is a visual nuisance next to water towers on a ridgeline with several trees that blends in very well, to me personally, I just don't get it, and I haven't, which is why I took time off of work to be here today. As you guys, and as your staff has done the research, to me, it just doesn't make sense as to why we're still here debating that. I don't think it's a legal issue. I think you've examined that. And so my personal opinion is I think we need greater cell phone coverage. I think it benefits thousands of potential customers. It helps alleviate emergency situations, economic issues. I think when you weigh the two, between the two, to me it's very evident that the greater benefit overall far outweighs some of the concerns that were expressed today, although I respect those that express their opinions. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley.
Hi, my name is Joey Jordan, and when I moved to this area about 20 years ago, lived on a dirt road, and then we had a lot of people move in who wanted to pave the road, and well, they knew it was a dirt road when they moved in, but somehow they thought it was important to change that of those that were here before them, and they decided to take votes and change things to make them different than they were when they moved in. Just for those of you that know me in the room, does it strike anyone else as ironic that I would be here to be the local voice of property rights? The issues at stake here are not at all about a cell tower, but how the county upholds the laws and treats everyone fairly, as it's required to do. It's also about how the county protects people's property rights. Now, I drove down Pleasant Valley Road recently, and the Verizon crane is very visible and silhouetted against the sky. A cell tower is much fatter than that skinny crane. It'll be much more obvious. But I never got a text from Verizon telling me that I should comment to the county about that, so I didn't bother, but I'm going to now. There are a lot of, I would say, plenty of less intrusive alternatives that Verizon has identified, which provide the cell phone coverage that people appear to want so desperately. The applicant has failed to provide any substantial evidence for the record that this is the least intrusive, which is the requirement for a cell tower permit. I'm curious why public safety is an issue now when it wasn't when Lake Wildwood residents blocked cell towers in 1997 and again in 2008. Those are just the two that have come out during the course of these proceedings, but maybe Lake Wildwood has blocked other cell towers. I'm not aware of that. Why is it that a public safety issue appears if the tower is outside of Lake Wildwood, but not when it was proposed inside of Lake Wildwood? You, the supervisors, already gave a permit to an illegal cell tower in December, which forced a private citizen to take legal action. If you permit this cell tower, when it's clearly against the county's rules, you're declaring that this is a county policy to refuse to enforce its own planning issues and rules. Private citizens will no longer be able to rely on the county for fair treatment and the county to uphold the law. When did it become county policy that private citizens have to go to court to protect their rights? And Todd, I just have to say, over the last 10 or 15 years, we've always been on the same side of issues, and we've always fought for what's right. And I'm just kind of shocked at the presentation today and the position that you're taking when you shouldn't really have a position at all. It's pretty obvious. And to the Verizon attorney who spoke earlier, would you like to explain to the county how you happen to come by the texts and emails of support that you have solicited from the Lake Wildwood residents? Did you happen to mention that you sent out a text to everybody asking them to comment on this? Because you kind of failed to send out the text to tell us all that we should comment about how we don't like what we're seeing. That's all I have to say today.
Thank you, Joey.
Nancy Weber. Say that again, I wasn't close enough. Nancy Weber. I'm on the NID board, and I'm not here to speak for the board or to speak about litigation. But this is obviously a situation gone awry. The original decision at the NID level made the situation for the county complicated, and it's become more and more complicated. And to me, it looks like who's going to win, who, you know, it's sort of like a great sports event where you choose one team or the other. I think we've lost our perspective. Citizens should not have to defend themselves against government, and this is what you have in this situation. I think you need to return this to NID to find another site and not abuse the person's property rights by putting an obtrusive object in their viewshed. The safety issues, all of those issues can be addressed from some other site, I'm sure. This isn't the only last place on earth to put this. So let's not lose perspective. What we're trying to do is treat people decently, I think, those of us in government. Let's work on that. And I will do all I can at the NID level to help that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else? Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Gene Vanderplatz. I'm the fire chief of the Penn Valley Fire District. Our district covers 92 square miles, including Lake Wildwood, but also areas around Lake Wildwood. I'm not going to talk to all the legalese and the variances, and because you have staff and you have adequate advice on that, but I just one quick comment. I don't think Verizon picked this site because they didn't have the most customers satisfied. I would assume that one of their goals is to service the most customers. We're one of their customers, and I just wanted to explain to the board how important cell phone communication is in our operation. We provide paramedics and an ambulance service, and the way that our medics contact the doctor at the hospital for direction is by cell phone. We also recently got a couple of heart monitors that we can do a 12-lead EKG and send that to a hospital. That's also by cell phone technology. In the area around Lake Wildwood and even outside Lake Wildwood, there's areas that we don't have that reception, and we have to actually put the patient in the ambulance and drive somewhere to get that reception. And I don't want to be dramatic, but in some cases, minutes and seconds make a difference. And we did actually have a gentleman a few months ago who would not have survived had we not had this heart monitor, been able to transmit it by cell phone technology. The cardiologist was ready at the hospital when we got there, and a few more minutes would have made a difference. So I don't know who's right and who's wrong on variances and setbacks and the other things. I just want you to understand how important adequate coverage is, whether it's Verizon or AT&T, or I don't really care who or where, but the best coverage we can get is what we're asking for. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone else? If you came here to speak, now would be the time. Once I close public comment, to be sure it'll be closed. Okay, I will close the public hearing portion of the meeting.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could we take a 3-minute break?
Yeah, actually, this would be a good time. Our next item will be a summation by the project proponent. Then we'll go into summation by appellant, rebuttal by members of the public. So now would be an appropriate time. Why don't we take 3 minutes? Understood. Okay, we're back in session. This is the opportunity for summation by project proponent. And they will be allotted 10 minutes.
Could we just give a minute for the court reporter to get back here? Oh, yeah.
Mr. Hurd.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond briefly to a couple of points that came up during the public comment. The claim that there's no substantial evidence that this is the least intrusive place to fill this coverage gap is just completely belied by the record. There is ample substantial evidence in the record. We've addressed that issue ad nauseum, and I'm not going to take your time by reciting all that evidence, but it's there in the record. And the other point was the direct question that was addressed to me, suggesting there was something improper in the way these emails and text messages from your 351 constituents came about. We've been completely transparent, to use a phrase, about that. The letter from the Verizon Wireless representative transmitting these to you, it's in your agenda packet, and in that letter it recited the message that went out verbatim. It recited what you would see on the web link, and so there's nothing improper about that whole chain of events. And finally, I'd like to come back to focus on the narrow scope of this appeal. As you've heard from staff, the real issue here is whether you should approve moving this tower downhill approximately 100 feet from the original location. All of this other stuff is just noise. Now, in a rational world, the appellants would support what we're proposing today because it has nothing but advantages over what this board approved last December. It's further away from their property line. It complies with all setbacks, so there's no longer any variance issue. And in moving further from their property line, it reduces the already minimal impacts of the project. In fact, what we propose today is what Mr. Haley himself proposed last year. I'd like to hand the clerk copies of page 5 of Mr. Haley's letter of July 19, 2011, that was attached to the current appeal that's pending before this board. Now, it's true this is already in the record. I simply wanted to make it easier for you to see the language in question, which I've highlighted. Mr. Haley wrote last year, and I'm quoting, "If Verizon wants to have a cell tower on the proposed site at the elevation of the NID water tanks, the solution is to require it to build the tower with the same 48-foot height in front of the tanks, where the normal setback requirements may still be observed." Close quote. If this was the solution last year, why is it so terrible now? And I'd like to suggest an answer. This is a classic example of the well-known NIMBY problem, not in my backyard. Nothing we do will satisfy these appellants unless we simply pick up and move the facility to some other neighborhood about which they've been quite explicit. That's not a reasonable position, and it's not a position that has any factual or legal basis. In conclusion, I'd like to ask that you deny their baseless appeal and allow Verizon Wireless to move forward with this vitally needed project to provide the coverage that so many residents of Lake Wildwood are clamoring for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. And now we'll have a summation by the appellant, also up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Alan Haley again. I will take the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone by responding to this last point. That was a letter written in 2011. There's a lot that's passed under the bridge since then. And particularly this reference of staff and Verizon to the tree cutting that has apparently been going on as shown by the photographs. When I wrote that letter, there was still, had not yet arisen this issue that we're going to address in the next appeal about the fairness of requiring a dedication of those trees to the county so that the Lockyers could be permitted to build their house. And that since has very seriously muddied these waters. The trimming that has occurred, no trees have been cut down. The trimming that has occurred was in response, as you will learn on the next appeal, to staff's claim that those trees were necessary to keep you from being able to see the Lockyers' garage, proposed garage. Those very trees were part of the expanded area that staff insisted be added to the dedication requirement without any rational basis for it. And so to demonstrate that, because we knew the test was coming up, we would be at some point having to present evidence in court of what you could actually see. Those trees were trimmed and photographs were taken, and you all had opportunities to go out there to try to see the red flag that represented the Lockyer office building. And we have photographs among what I've submitted there to show you what was there. And there was no way that anyone could see that. So even with those trees trimmed, my point is made, and that's what's going on here. And it was Verizon who, in concert with county staff, tried to impose that requirement on the Lockyers because they need those trees for their backdrop of their cell tower under the standard which they're asking you to apply, which is completely a mix-mash of the law. Once again, council muddied the law by citing to you a proposed part of the statute that says as long as it's camouflaged, as long as it blends in with the background, and everybody seems to have picked up on that. Well, if you look at paragraph 3.8 again, and the plain language says nothing about camouflage, it says nothing about mixing in the section that says no new tower shall be placed on an exposed ridgeline or so as to silhouette against the sky. It does not contain the word camouflage in that provision. That's a later provision down in the, and one of the oldest tricks in the books, as you know, is for magicians, is to get your attention over here when the real show is going on over here. Please don't lose the focus of what the law says in that first clause of paragraph 4.3, I'm sorry, 3.8. And similarly, 4.3.16, dealing with visually important ridgelines, again speaks in absolute language, shall not extend above the ridgeline. Says nothing about camouflage, disguise, or anything like that. These together both establish a visual standard. You can prominently see the cell tower on this visually important ridgeline, and you can't see the proposed garage at all under the same visual standard. Applying both standards equally well, they both stick up above the ridgeline, but this one juts in such a way as to silhouette against the sky. The Lockyer prose structure is not even visible. So I come back to the fact. All this hand-waving, too, about alternative sites not being part of the record, it's been addressed again and again. Verizon has put it at issue again. A court's going to look at it, unless counsel is waiving at this point his right to rely on that revised document being in the record in the subsequent proceedings in the court, and I don't think he's going to do that. We have the right to point out the inadequacies that remain on that. The best thing for this supervisory board to do in this situation is to send this application back to the drawing board and instructions to planning staff to work with NID and Verizon to come up with a site that does not involve a visually prominent ridgeline, exactly as staff has defined this one to be. Staff first wants it both ways. They want it to be a visually important ridgeline for purposes of Mr. Lockyer's house, but then they want to soften that and mitigate it and ignore it for Verizon's cell tower. The law doesn't work that way. You can't apply it differently to one person and differently and in favor of another. That is a constitutional violation, as your own counsel will tell you, and subjects the county to a potential further lawsuit. So as I say, the best thing you can do is send this back and instruction to work out a better location. And however, no matter what else you do today, no matter what else, I plead with you, uphold the law. That is your first duty to this county. And it is first duty to your constituents and especially to the parties here before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haley. There is an opportunity for members of the public to rebut. If they so desire, you would be limited to 2 minutes on rebuttal. Does any member of the public wish to do so?
Well, I kind of lucked out. There was no collusion. I didn't talk to the Lockyers or their lawyer, but
I need your name for the record.
John Nelson, Wildwood Heights. But I was pleased to see that he was talking about your first duty is to uphold the law. The law, again, is very specific, and it doesn't say anything about providing cell phone coverage and a lot of other things that we've been hearing about. It's interesting that Verizon comes up here. They're legal experts and spend a lot of time talking about cell phone coverage. That's not what you're here to decide. You're not here to carry water for Verizon. And to me, it looks like you carry water for Verizon. At the last meeting, I mentioned that and I didn't get my wording quite right. I just heard this somewhere that the judge had made a ruling against Verizon, and county council, who doesn't normally jump in on these things, jumped in and said, no, that's actually not right. He did not make any ruling, and she was very explicit and clear and precise in her language, which to me was designed to be misleading. Apparently what he did do was say, if this proceeds, you don't have the law on your side, and I'm going to rule against you. Maybe I've got it wrong again, and you're going to be able to spin it just right. But to me, that looks like not transparency, but carrying water for Verizon. I would like to see that stop. I don't think it's that hard. All you have to do is go by the law, not have a side agenda for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason is. I know what Verizon's reason is. I know their history. But I don't want to see you guys doing that. I know I'm not going to get transparency from Verizon. You're not going to get it either. But the law is clear. It shouldn't be that hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Anybody else? Okay. At this point, staff summation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Go ahead.
Okay. When it really boils down to it, appears there are a couple components in this, that if we can sort through all the standards here for new towers being placed in an area. Standard 3.8E.1.A says that no tower shall silhouette against the sky. And again, so the question is, how do we interpret silhouette against the sky? In my presentation, I gave examples of towers on exposed ridge lines. For the record, the first such cell phone or cellular tower at the site was in fact denied because it clearly was, substantially above the skyline by quite a few feet, not just 3 or 4 feet, but half the tower was well above the ridge line. The second standard, also in that same section E.1, goes on to state that no new tower shall be installed unless it blends with the surrounding existing natural and man-made environment so as to be effectively unnoticeable. So it's not just this, does any point of that tower from any vantage point, because I challenge that any particular cell tower, if you get up close enough to it or stand in some location, there will be parts of that tower that will silhouette against the sky. And that would be a very difficult standard for any structure to have to conform to. And so when we look at this, we read, yes, the literal reading of that, and whether or not it's as black and white as Mr. Haley insists that we interpret this, but what's the intent of that? And staff did have to take a very close look at what was the purpose of having this development section here. Do we not want these jutting towers way up above the skyline? Mr. Haley submits that this does jut. It appears that a couple 3, 4 feet of this tower may in fact appear against the blue sky in the backdrop, if you look at it from certain vantage points, and that may be the case, but ultimately the zoning administrator concluded that when looking at the ridge line in total, and then that's a noun, and I looked it up in the dictionary and I put it in my presentation. That's a line formed across the highest points of a mountain ridge. It doesn't say anything about ground level, doesn't say anything about tree line, but in the natural setting of that, we look at that, and where we distinguish between the earth and the sky, there's a blue line that separates those two, and if you draw a line across the tops of those features out there, yes, they may change in general, but at the point of this application, at the time that was proposed and how we are looking at it, the question is it predominantly the main thing you notice when you look up there? And because a couple few feet stuck up, in certain vantage points, it was determined that wasn't the case. It's a judgment call, and your board is certainly entitled to
to make your independent decision of that. But staff, I'm here to present that, when that very question came up, we looked at that coupled with, is it trying to blend, is it camouflaged, and it does, the subsection B does go into, were efforts made to minimize the impact of that visual structure, to make it try and blend. And short of cutting another 20 feet off the tower or 2 feet off the tower, whatever, to get it to view below the ridge line is apparently being modified. That's the question, and so it boiled down to the zoning administrator felt that it was a good faith effort to keep that tower consistent. That's an interpretation of the code, and that's how we see it, and that was ultimately how that decision was made. With regard to the second point, whether or not the specific site was even justified, the code does go on to say very few words about, and this was a bigger point in the last appeal that we had last December, but there are very few words that talk about justification of the site. It doesn't go into the mathematics or the science. It goes into it. I apologize, I didn't quite get the note. But it talks about the search ring and finding your desired intent of the area. The code doesn't talk about exact methodology for using the ways to measure the intensity or the coverage of the tower. It just, there's a one-sentence blurb in there that says you need to provide some sort of documentation to justify why this tower site was proposed. The code doesn't go into great detail, and so the interpretation is pretty broad, and there's been a plethora of evidence provided, analyzing quite a few sites, and so we felt that, that it boils down to the highest point is going to serve the greatest number of people for the least amount of cost. That was the justification.
Todd, just a quick clarification for my benefit. You're talking about our code, doesn't go into...
Correct. I'm talking about the Nevada County Land Use Code, and those are the only rules we're using here. We're not using industry standard or how it was done in Connecticut or anywhere else. These are the only things that we're called to interpret. So anyway, so the again, that section I was referring to for justifying the site, that's subsection D1, where it says detailed information to justify the need for the proposed tower site, i.e. the search ring, the desired service area, technical reasons for the proposed tower height, and the specific site selection standards. And so they did provide that information in both applications, in the original application, and they again submitted it with this application, and it basically reaches the same conclusion that that they believe that this is the best tower for their facilities. So again, it's a difficult call. It is a discretionary decision. That's why it's a use permit. You have to take into account all of the public input, as well as the agency input, and ultimately that was the decision that was reached by the zoning administrator.
Excuse me, just again, one more clarification. So you're saying that these are some of the considerations, but they don't have the technical parameters that have to be met. Is that what you're...
Correct. There are no specific studies or, types of studies or math equations that are cited in that. I read verbatim the entire standard, so
okay.
How you choose to interpret that, is within your discretion for the use permit. So that is the standard.
Does that conclude your summation?
So again, we feel that the appeals should be, or the decision of the zoning administrator should be upheld based on the evidence we have.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll move into deliberations at this point. We're going to take a break, but before we do, just so that everybody understands, the appeal hearing is concluded for this particular appeal, and that the Board of Supervisors may sustain, overrule, or modify any action of the planning agency. We're going to take a 3-minute comfort break and deliberate and take care of that. I certainly did not want to deprive Supervisor Weston of any of the fun we're about to have.
Welcome back.
We will go into deliberation, and I will start with Supervisor Weston.
Well, I have one question. Mr. Haley stated that our council would advise us that there is a difference between how this is being applied. So my question is to you councils, are we making a difference in application as to what is ridgeline and what is not?
No, I don't believe so. This is a question of board discretion and interpretation of your own ordinances, and you have a lot of discretion to determine what the appropriate interpretation is.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Supervisor Schofield.
Well, again, this seems to be a question of interpretation. I don't know what law it is that we're breaking. And I think if there was a law we were breaking, we would be quite aware of it. And it seems to be more of interpretation. You know, exposed ridge lines and silhouettes against the sky. I guess my own interpretation, especially this silhouette against the sky, a good example was one of the pictures that you showed up there, Todd. If you had had that 88-foot tower that was originally proposed, that certainly would have been silhouetting against the sky. But from what I can tell on this, it just doesn't stand out that much. And while I look at all this documentation, I'm trying to make this complicated, and it's not that complicated. May not be as simple as Mr. Haley says, but to me, we've already gone through all this. We've talked about alternate sites, and the only difference between what we did in December of last year and what we have right now is that it no longer is a variance. It's further away from the lot lines. It's even lower down on the property line. So I suspect that I guess that interpretation is probably going to have to be decided at some other point, but I frankly can't find any reason why I would go against staff's report on this, and I don't see where we're not transparent on this thing either.
Thank you. Supervisor Lamphere.
Well, are we doing questions and comments?
You can ask questions. You can do whatever you
Okay.
like.
Well, I'll just start with a few basics. My understanding is that we are in litigation, and I'm a little, I had asked this earlier, but I'd like for public record. So this is, regardless of what we do today, may or may not go to a judge anyway?
Correct.
And our actions today possibly influence that process one way or another?
I have no idea.
I'm just wondering whether we're kind of jumping the gun because, I mean, after going through 290 pages of this over the weekend, I haven't passed the law bar exam yet, so it's it's a challenge. Okay, now, some basics. Page 116 in our packet. Most of these things were fairly well identified with enough research. This shows a map with a bunch of circles on it, and it's from Verizon Wireless, and it says locations of sites proposed and alternatives. And there's, I think I counted up something like 20 or 25 of those, and some of them are identified as proposed, and some of them are identified as existing. But what are the rest of them? Are they towers that are there, or possible sites, or who can answer this question for me? Page 116.
I believe these were the sites that were well, some of them were in existence, but if you had read the alternative site analysis, Supervisor Lamphere, in I believe it was appended to the attachment 3 of the board staff report. The attachment 3 is the zoning administrator staff report, and the alternative site analysis was in there. And several of those white dots, all of those indicate the alternative sites that were looked at, some of which are existing sites and some of which are not. And unfortunately, this graphic doesn't really distinguish between which ones are and which ones are not. So it's
So I guess I'm trying to figure out of this, how many existing towers are there? The reason I'm asking this is because this goes back to the visibility issue, and I've been around in that area, and my personal experience is I've not noticed the towers that are there. So I'm just trying to get a sense, are there a whole bunch of them and I'm just not seeing them, or just a few?
Supervisor Lanphier, I think the Verizon representative would probably best answer that question. I believe there's 2 towers. There's 4 towers, but we can verify with Verizon.
Well, we don't need to go further with that. I just wanted to get a sense of, I mean, if there were 25 towers in there, they're doing a good job of fighting them so far. Now, some of the issues that were raised from both sides were issues about credibility, and or at least in my mind, there were some issues raised around this tree trimming versus cutting business, and whether or not that was, how appropriate that was to do or not. But it does affect this ridgeline business, and I think it does complicate things. I don't think this helped make this, in some ways might have helped further certain answers but complicated others. And there was an issue raised by one person that testified that there was a petition going around, and there was a drawing and it exaggerated proportions and so on and so forth. But I also was looking at the Verizon side of it, and the emails and text messages that were provided, I didn't see any indication, for example, with the text messages, were these all discrete, separate phone numbers that they received? Is it possible that some people were doing multiple entries from the same phone? There was no explanation about that in terms of looking for community support. Well, now with the emails, that was a little bit easier to go through, the 80 some odd that were shown in there. I counted out in that actually there were a number of duplications and several from the same household. Now you could argue whether or not mom and dad and the kids all have a right to weigh in on this, and they probably do if they all have separate contracts, but it's not quite 80 separate residents in there or so. It gets a little more complicated than that, like 50, 60, maybe 70. Now, I've heard different things from different parties, the proponents and the appellants, as to the appropriateness of revisiting some of the things that were raised in an earlier hearing. If this were a court of law, I think a judge would probably say asked and answered. However, I think that it is part of the appeal to revisit some of these things, and I think it is a legitimate thing to do. And what I was, I spent a good part of the weekend going through this to try to really get clear, as clear as I could be being a non-lawyer, what's going on here. And the issues with the ridgeline and the backdrops and so on and so forth, and both the appellants and proponents with their photos, I'm seeing pretty much a mixed message all around on this. There is no clear thing. If there was a clear thing, we wouldn't be here. Both the appellants and the proponents, some of their photos show the tower prominent and others show it blending in. So I think that's equivocable. The concern that I would have for our end of it going forward is, at what point does a gap constitute an exposed ridgeline? And to me, that gets into, as was raised by our staff here, a bit of a judgment call. And I don't think that going forward in this is going to serve us. I think we will need to revisit this and be a little bit more clear on that. Is a 20-foot gap still ridgeline essentially? Is a 200-foot gap ridgeline, or is that exposed ridgeline at that point? So there is a judgment call. But the practical effect, so I went back and forth between supporting staff recommendations and thinking the appellants had some good points in here over the weekend. It was not an easy thing for me. But that is one area that I think weakens our position a bit, is that it is subjective. However, as I mentioned, both photos from the appellants and proponents make this essentially, in my mind, a non-issue. You can show it blending in some places and standing out in others. And I have to come down on the side of the county with this one, that the judgment call was an appropriate one. It's good enough. But we need work on that. This business about whether the proposed facility is the least intrusive means. Now, I'm going back to, we didn't talk about much about it today, but it is raised in regards to alternative locations. And one of the parts of whether or not that's appropriate and how you make that judgment is we're bound to some degree by federal regulations. If a need is identified, and I think both parties have identified there's a need, that's not the question. The second test is, have you explored reasonable alternatives? And I'm not the lawyer, so I'm just paraphrasing what I think I understood on here. And that's where I started going with the appellants on this, because even though this was, we had looked at this in our earlier thing, and the bulk of the board had supported the staff's recommendations on this, I'm troubled by that. I'm not sure that we did all that we could do to practice due diligence to explore this alternative business. And what I would see is, by my understanding of the documents, Verizon did an analysis on a per site basis with a couple of co-location, if you did a little bit here and a little bit there. But I didn't see anything that really kind of addressed, if a number of improvements were done at a number of sites, how much that would meet the need that's been identified that this proposed tower would, in one shot, meet. Nor did I see, well, what if you took the existing tower, you could get rid of the sight line, the ridge line thing, dropping it another 10 feet, it gives out some coverage, maybe in conjunction with some of these alternative sites, and you're there. Verizon gets its tower, the sight line issue is resolved. So I'm just looking at this. It's curious that Verizon would say that the appellant's expert witness is not really an expert witness. He's not qualified to make a technical argument. And yet, in reviewing the letter of the appellant's consultant, he seemed to be much more versed in the issues of technical arguments, and I didn't see that in the documents provided Verizon. Driving around the neighborhood doing cell coverage in a car versus doing an actual analysis is more what, and I'm not a lawyer nor an electronics technician here, but I'm just trying to interpret what I read in here, that it looked like that the appellant's non-expert expert had some much more rigorous standards for how to evaluate what you have and what you need and what the various alternatives would provide. Another criteria, I'm kind of stuck in an awkward place here. I got to say this, because I'm on our local broadband committee and I see value in, high value in expanding coverage to households for personal public safety. That's my county supervisor being responsible hat. Economic development, that's part of my broadband thing. Private property rights is a big thing in our county, and I see this thing that we're doing here today, in my mind, as kind of a precedent. This won't be the first time this comes through. Having a cell tower and having people opposed and people supporting, and I feel like we really need to get this right as much as we possibly can. So I'm a little concerned about people manipulating the process, in my mind, to some degree, on both sides, and having what I'm seeing is a lack of all the data that I would need to make a good decision on this. A further technical evaluation, I think, would be, in my mind, very helpful on this. And at the end of the day, in my mind, this could lead to a good solution for everybody, that it protects property rights, provides the services needed. And by the way, the federal government, from my reading, they don't say you have to have maximum internet coverage. Their standard is, are you protecting public safety and providing basic service? The appellant's consultant said, that might be an easier threshold to meet than perhaps what Verizon is looking for, which is, importantly, would enable some economic development by having a higher level of service. So if it were me, now I understand finally, and I've said a lot, I appreciate everyone's patience on this. I understand there is a time clock and there are deadlines for a decision. Otherwise, it defaults to a different position, an earlier proposal. But I would like to actually see this tabled until we have this technical data supplied that does an evaluation of a combination of alternatives to see if, in fact, there's a way to meet everyone's concerns. The private property view, the ridge line protection, the services needed, public safety, enhanced broadband, all these things. I somehow feel like there might be a solution in there for that, just a win for everybody. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for coming today. It's important that we get as much input as we can. Where to begin? I would kind of like to dispense with this idea there's some sort of collusion going on. I can tell you that I haven't had a private meeting that I recall with the Verizon folks. I don't know of anybody on the board that has. We're not in the business of doing that. We're trying to make the best decision we can for the community. Some people don't like the decisions we make, and some do. That doesn't mean there's any kind of misbehavior going on. I think public safety is very important as a consideration. I think convenience is very important as a consideration. I think a possible venue for high-speed internet is a very important consideration. It's ironic there's a person here who wants high-speed internet in his neighborhood but seems to be opposed to this potential possibility. I agree with Mr. Nelson. Despite the safety issue and the communications issue and the convenience aspects of this, we got to go by the law. And I was struck. I'd been sat here listening a while, and I'd heard Mr. Nelson talk about ambiguity, and I thought, if there wasn't any ambiguity in the law, we wouldn't need any lawyers. And I think the lawyers here over a beer would agree with that. And that's what I think we have to look at, what's legal. And Mr. Haley is a highly respected attorney of a well-established reputation. And I would be the last person to try to challenge him in a battle of knowledge of what's legal and illegal, but I do know how to read and write the English language. And he started talking about magic on one hand and reality on the other, and it was at the very moment I was thinking about Plato's myth of the cave, and some of you know, he knows what I'm talking about. But I think if we deny this appeal, we'll be perfectly legal. I think it's been pretty well laid out that we have discretion. I've read the regulations. I can make a distinction, and if somebody wants to challenge that, they can do it. But I believe that county council would agree with me that we're on the side of the law if we deny this appeal. Would you not?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So and as far as, continuing this on, it's been going on now for a long time, and I think it's time to get it resolved. And you may or may not agree with me, but I think that, and I hold no brief for Verizon. In fact, sometimes I've been mad at Verizon because of my cell phone service. But in any event, I think we need to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. I agree with Supervisor Beeson's comments and Supervisor Schofield's comments. I would oppose tabling this. We've been through this without great, what I would call or consider great differentiation. Two things disturb me. One is the tree trimming. I'll go back to the days of being a planning commissioner. You could run afoul of a planning commission pretty darn quickly in almost any other structural application by modifying the site during the process. And I think that says a lot in my view. So that's disturbing. The other element of the letter of Mr. Haley's letter of July 19th, 2011, the highlighted information I think is interesting and very persuasive at the time, where the plea is made basically to analyze moving the tower in front of the tanks where the normal setback requirements may be still observed. Later, in the same paragraph, the application submitted is fundamentally flawed because its failure to analyze the feasibility of locating the proposed tower elsewhere on the NID property. It almost seems like it was designed to drive to the modifications that were made, and now here we are appealing those modifications. So I, for those reasons, am going to support denial of the appeal. I think that the argument that was laid down in the first appeal was adequate and sufficient relative to the other related issues, but I don't think there's that much that has changed here, only improvement of the siting of the cell tower. I do believe that we should always follow the law. And planning documents, I think it's referred to, Mr. Herman, as a general plan, the word general. There is discretion in our ordinances and our land use planning decisions because we often complain about a one-size-fits-all type situation that comes out of Sacramento. Well, you know, a cell tower site is not the same site to site to site. And so some discretion is certainly appropriate. Are there any other comments, Supervisor Weston, that you might have? It's your district. Anything else to add?
I believe if we're dealing with the upholding the zoning administrator who has reviewed it, heard it, and is recommended the new use permit that moved it 100 feet, took away the variance. And I drive by it every day, and I've seen the tree line change, and so I believe it's better today than it was when we reviewed it last time. So I would be in favor of the zoning administrator's position.
Anyone else? Okay, then I will call for an action. We do have a recommendation. Again, we don't have to follow staff's recommendation. We can adopt, we can deny, we can modify.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I kind of suspect how this will go, but I'd like to make a motion that we table this and gather some further technical information in order to be able to make a good decision on this.
Okay, we have a motion to table the item. Is there a second? Okay, the motion fails for lack of a second. Thank you, Supervisor. Would anyone else like to make a motion on the resolution?
Yeah, I'll move to adopt the resolution denying the appeal and uphold the decision of the zoning administrator to approve the amended permit and the adoption of the mitigated negative declaration. But there was a change in language, isn't there?
There is change in language.
And mitigation monitoring and reporting program.
In the resolution.
It's right here, in the title of the resolution.
Okay, before I make the motion, can I ask a question? What is mitigated monitoring and reporting program?
Thank you for asking that. That was my question as well.
That's part of the conditions of approval that were attached to the resolution. When we adopt a CEQA document that has mitigation measures in it, part of that process is to make sure that they're being reported on and that we're following through to make sure that mitigation measures are actually being fulfilled. So that's the program that's being referred to in that resolution, and that is actually embedded in the conditions of approval. The change that's being recommended is simply wording clarification to make sure it's clear what action the board is taking.
And what are those mitigations?
They are set out in the conditions of approval.
Attachment 2.
Attachment 2. And Todd, I don't know if you can go over those quickly.
Give them the handwritten.
The county incorporates both their conditions and their mitigation measures together into one document. That's the way our process process works. So that's why they don't necessarily stand out to you, is because they're identified within the conditions of approval.
I apologize, but I did spend all weekend on this, and then when I get this thing an hour or two ago that says that we're changing the language to mitigations, I would have had a chance to research and find out what that meant in the documents, but I'm really not clear at all what those mitigations are. So
Actually, we got a recirculation of the document that had been sent prior by county council. It was sent twice.
recirculation of the
Yeah,
document.
it was emailed to us all.
No.
Okay. So.
No, I got a handout.
You got a handout.
It's this change.
It's simply a wording change. It does not change any substance of what was actually presented to you before. It's simply for clarification to call out that that's part of the approval.
Well, my understanding of the English language is when you're mitigating something, you're making some sort of a change and then you're monitoring to be sure that it stays in compliance with this change that you're making. And I don't know what that change is that we're referring to.
It's spelled out in the conditions of approval that were previously provided to you in your packet. It actually says mitigation measure in the conditions of approval.
Well, I won't ask.
I'd be happy to explain the CEQA process to you.
We're in the middle of a motion, Supervisor. Before we move on.
Yeah, I will amend my motion. And now I'll move a resolution denying the appeal filed by Peter Lockyer and Juliet Erickson regarding the zoning administrator's approval of the amended permit and the adoption of the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the complete wireless telecommunications facility on property located at 14050 Pleasant Valley Road, AP 12-001 and EIS 12-005.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Yes.
District 1. District 3.
I wanted to be able to support this, but I can't, no.
District 4.
Yes.
District 5.
Yes, and the motion carries 4-1. Let's take 5 before we go to agenda item 22. 5. Okay, if everyone could take their seats. We only have one more public hearing on the docket for this afternoon. Agenda item 22, which is a public hearing to consider appeal filed by Peter Lockyer, Juliet Erickson regarding the planning director's conditions 2 and 3 of the July 12, 2012 approval letter for their management plan. I'll turn it back over to Todd Hermans and staff. We will follow the same procedure and process that we did for the first public hearing.
Thank you, Chairman Owens. This appeal is on the management plan on the adjacent property than the one we just heard. The management plan file number is referenced as MGT 11004. Between April of 2010 and February of 2011, the Planning Department processed the original use permit application for the cell tower. At that time, it was an 88-foot tall structure on the adjacent NID parcel. And that tower was to be located behind or on the north side of the water tanks. Ultimately, that application was in fact denied because the proposed tower height extended well above the ridgeline canopy. During the consideration of that cell tower, the appellants opposed the project while arguing that this ridgeline is a visually important ridgeline. Shortly after that use permit denial, the applicants then applied for a building permit to construct a new home on their property. The proposed residence includes a detached 2-story garage and with an office on the upstairs floor, and it was situated approximately 35 feet from the NID property line along the same ridge line. Section L, Roman numeral 2, 4.316 of the zoning ordinance applies to new construction along visually prominent ridge lines and large-scale view sheds and requires that a management plan be prepared if a proposed structure may be visible along the ridge line. This is just a profile view of the southern exposure of that detached garage. And I will note that this structure is proposed to be, the peak of the roof is 20 feet above the grade. Again, this same section of the zoning ordinance requires that a management plan include a visual analysis of the area and delineate specific protective measures and impact controls necessary to minimize the visual impact on them to the maximum extent possible. Again, this is language that we can provide an alternative to something in the event that it may be visible. So given the fact that we had just considered another project that was potentially visible above the ridgeline, this standard is a little bit different, though. Staff advised the applicants of this requirement on June 7th, and a management plan was then subsequently submitted. This management plan included photos taken from the off-site locations, and note that the existing mature healthy trees located directly south of the building will remain to help screen the building and establish a visual profile of the ridgeline. And I stress that. So in their very management plan, they are citing that it's the trees that establish this visual ridgeline on the south side of the garage. So after reviewing the management plan and our contour maps on August 12, 2011, staff had originally approved that management plan, and that approval was based in part upon the recommendations of their own management plan, which was prepared by their architect, and listed 3 conditions of approval. Among these conditions, it required that there be a limitation on the building heights to match with what was proposed with the structures, and 2, that the existing native vegetation remain on the southern sides of the buildings. Planning had prepared a deed restriction that would have been recorded with that property to protect those areas. And there were limitations against tree removal within that protection zone. Here's a blow-up of their very management plan that was proposed, and the green area that I have highlighted here was that noted tree line along the southern part of the property that was going to help screen their garage structure. This is an example in the red of what the original proposal was for the deed restriction. It was quite a bit larger, but it then took into account also some protection for the residents that was quite a bit back, and included some of the areas also to the east. Granted, this was an approval that was made by our planning staff when reviewing the building permit. And again, this shows the area that was originally recommended and how it ultimately got to be quite a bit bigger. Included with that approval was a notice that there was a 10-day appeal period, which would have ended on August 22nd of 2011. In response to that request to take photos from that parcel, a request from the Verizon applicants, a letter was submitted by the appellant's attorney dated August 18th, 2011, that conditionally allowed some photos to be taken from the Lockyer's property. However, it contained a stipulation that a number of trees had some orange flags or tags on them, and that those trees were scheduled to be removed. A copy of that letter was provided to staff, and it posed a potential conflict with the 3 conditions of the management plan, and so staff had sent a letter advising that if those trees were in fact removed, it may pose some conflict and nullify the approval of their management plan. The appellants then went out and hired SCO Engineering to prepare some line of sight exhibits of their property from various points along Pleasant Valley Road. And although no appeal was ever filed, the appellant's attorney sent a letter dated August 26th, after the close of the appeal period, to the planning director questioning staff's rationale for the larger deed restriction area. Included with the August 26th letter was an exhibit proposing a modified deed restriction area that the applicant had proposed to that should be used in alternative to the one that staff had proposed, and that letter was highlighted in red here. And again, it appeared to be in greater contrast from what the original management plan was. As a result, the revised application for a 48-foot cell tower was then submitted, and on December 6, 2011, the board considered an appeal of that cell tower. And on December 4th, during that during that meeting, it came up that the appellant's attorney had argued that staff had never approved their management plan proposing based on their alternative area. As a result, staff and county council met with the applicant's attorney to discuss their concerns with the management plan, and following that meeting on December 20th, the appellant's attorney emailed the line of sight profiles that were prepared by Sylvester Engineering. Staff then went out to verify and consider those line of sight surveys, as well as to view the vegetation as seen from various points along within Lake Wildwood, along Pleasant Valley Road, and within Wildwood Estates, and from the NID parcel itself. Here's an example of the line of sight profiles 1 and 2, and here is 3 and 4. I believe these are included in the appeal packet, the appeal that's part of your staff report today. Following the site visit, staff then prepared a modified deed-restricted area, taking into account these 4 line of sight profiles and the notes that we took from our field trip. While some of the areas increased in size, others did decrease in size, and a copy of the modified deed restriction was then sent to county council, who relayed it to the applicant's attorney for their consideration. And ultimately, on April 10th, the appellant's attorney indicated that the applicants would not agree to the modified deed restriction area. So this was what was approved in August of 2011, and this is what the modified view became. We had opened up some of the areas east of the residence and of the proposed detached garage site, and did include some of the areas that were further down the hill in the southernmost portions of their property. A revised management plan on June 29th, County Council then agreed to have staff issue a new approval letter for the management plan, which then would have provided a new appeal period. So on July 12th, staff did send that revised approval letter to the applicants, and then of course on July 19th this appeal was filed. So the appeal raises 2 arguments of the appeal. One, that the conditions and the restrictions go far beyond what is required to screen the rooftop of the proposed garage office building, and they are only intended to ensure the retention of the background canopy would remain for the cell tower. And then the second argument is that the appeal seeks to remove conditions 2 and 3 of the July 19th modified approval letter. So going back to these line of sight profiles, staff identified them. Profile 1 was in green, profile 2 was in red, 3 was in blue, and 4 was in yellow. We plotted those on the county GIS maps from their various locations as seen in this slide, and then went back and noted that on each of these, and it's very hard to see the green, but only places where the line of sight was intercepted by vegetation, we shortened those color swaths, and on both of these it's just the far area behind those NID tanks. On line 3, you can tell that quite a bit of the topography and the vegetation extends above that line of sight detail, and so those areas were identified. In the top section north of the access road to the NID site shows up on the yellow. Staff then reduced those long lines and just incorporated those that intercepted the Lockyer property, which is identified by the white line. I've also roughly, and these are very crude drawings using the GIS system, but superimposed where the garage and the house would be. So where those colors intercept the line is how we came up with that red area. I'll note that the area to the far west was included because that was the area that the appellant's attorney had originally proposed. So the conditions and the restrictions with regard to the argument that these restrictions go far beyond what is required to screen the rooftop, I think in that last analysis it indicates that the polygon that we ultimately came up with was essentially justified by the SCO surveys, and that the appellant states that these line of sight profiles prove that the buildings be not only at the point of origin of those surveys, but all the area behind that point of origin makes that site invisible, and to that we disagree because of the topography and the elevation would change the profile line of sight. that argument would only work for Profile 3 that was included of those 4 they submitted. The standard set forth, and again, 4.3.16C1 requires that in no case shall the roof line or any portion of the structure extend above its visually important ridge line. And to this, I want to state that if in the prior appeal, if we use the argument that the ridge line is the ground line, then we have a 20-foot conflict. But we have consistently used the vegetation. So as long as the vegetation screens the home and the proposed structures, staff was okay with that. The only thing that the management plan is intended to do is to protect those areas. So that's the distinction. So even without the proposed cell tower, that same tree protection zone would be required to visually screen that detached garage structure. So this management plan was not looked at as something that's associated with or related to in any way with the cell tower site, but it was actually as a standalone document based on the standards that we were asked to use of calling this site a visually important ridge line. With regard to the second point, to remove conditions 2 and 3, this is just basically the mechanical function of that. The condition 2 requires the deed restriction to be recorded prior to the issuance of the building permit, and doesn't allow for, but does allow for certain exceptions to trees to be removed in that polygon, provided that there are health issues or fire danger issues with any of those trees in that area. And condition 3 simply requires that any trees that are necessary to be removed as part of the construction activities, because some vegetation will have to be cleared out for the trenching and whatever for the garage construction, that those be noted clearly on the site plan and that staff has a chance to approve those prior to the issuance of the building permit. So with these conditions are both necessary to enforce the intent of this section and the approved management plan. So therefore staff concludes that the approval of this management plan is only focused on the standards set forth in section 4.3.16 to protect the visually important ridge line, and that the management plan approval as amended essentially incorporates those 3 recommendations of the appellant's own architect and their June 7th management plan submittal, as well as the line of sight profiles that were submitted by SCO Engineering. Therefore, staff is recommending that you adopt the attached resolution to today's staff report and deny this appeal.
Thank you. We'll proceed to presentation by the appellant, which will also be limited to 15.
Mr. Lockyer will go first.
Okay.
Thanks. Can I have a seat?
Well, this is my seat. I need to take notes during this.
Okay. Thank you. F5. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Thank you. My name is Peter Lockyer. I'll just run through this presentation, which is in the record, very quickly. That's the timeline as set out by Todd. The one comment I'd add is that July the 19th, Alan Haley wrote to the county pointing out there was somewhat of a double standard being imposed on the visually important ridgeline issue.
Mr. Lockyer, I'm going to need you to get just a little closer to the mic.
Sorry.
Thank you.
August the 4th, 2012, I submitted, in response to the request for some trees to be deeded, I submitted a plan saying these 5 trees would be used because these are the 5 which restrict the view from Pleasant Valley Road, which was what was put in the letter. The response from the county was, as Todd said, was to ask for this, and we objected. Some correspondence which was sent to Al Britton, Verizon's lawyer, was forwarded to the county, and the county wrote back to us. Anyway, eventually, February the 14th, that was what we had from the county, from Ms. Barrett Green. And what had they done? They'd extended the area to include all this area marked over on the right-hand side, without providing a rational reason why they had done it. Well, if you want that extra area, you need to be able to see the house from the east of that black line. And that is the black line going through the whole neighborhood. So basically, what we're looking for, what I was looking for, was a rational explanation for what the county did, and looking for where on the east of that black line you would be able to see my proposed garage. Lake Wildwood identify 6 public areas, recreation areas on their website. 2 of those are east of the line, Meadow Park and Hideaway Park. Here's a line of sight from Meadow Park. As you know from your hearing in December, from Meadow Park you are blocked by a very significant hill. You cannot see the water tanks. From Hideaway Park, here is the line of sight from Hideaway Park. It is blocked by trees within Lake Wildwood. There is Hideaway Park, there are the trees. There are the trees. Ginger Loop, if the county wishes to extend it out to open spaces, here's a line of sight from Ginger Loop. It's blocked by the trees in Ginger Loop. Those are the trees, that is Ginger Loop. It is a little wooded area inside Lake Wildwood. That is Ginger Loop. If they want to go to Forest Circle, there's the line of sight from Forest Circle. Blocked by trees, there's Forest Circle, blocked by trees in Lake Wildwood. Blocked by trees in Lake Wildwood. There are no I was unable to find a recreation area or public place inside Lake Wildwood on the northern shore of the lake which could see the proposed house. I went to Explorer Park, and Explorer Park, it's blocked by that island. Vista Park is the most easterly recreation site that you may be able to see the house, but the line of sight goes to the other side of the water tanks, and so it is not blocked by the extended area. I would also add for the record that I do not think the line of sights which we supplied line up with 2 of those lines on that GIS map, because I believe from Pleasant Valley Road, the house is actually to the left of the water tanks. Okay, I went to Wildwood Ridge, and I spent a lot of time at Wildwood Ridge, and you cannot see behind the water tanks. There's a view from Gold Country Drive, there's another view from Gold Country Drive, and there's a third view from Gold Country Drive. Mathematically, because of the height of the water tanks, you would not be able to see the building behind the water tanks. It is completely blocked. So we are sitting here without a rational explanation of why the county are doing what they're doing. I'd like to hand over now to my attorney.
Thank you. I'll now add a few remarks. I think I'm very concerned by remarks that Supervisor Owens made at the conclusion of the last hearing, because I think those are wrong facts, and I don't want your wrong understanding of the facts to influence your deliberations on this appeal. The tree trimming did not occur pending the current cell tower application. It was done before that amended application was ever filed. It was done as a result of the disagreement, my disagreement with county staff over the value of those trees in the extended area to shield anything. Before Verizon ever even proposed moving its cell tower and filed that amended application, I was concerned that we could demonstrate that those trees, by trimming them, would not affect at all these line of sight arguments, and that was the point of doing that. So there was no subterfuge. We made it perfectly clear when Verizon did submit its application that all the photos that they were relying on were out of date. We filed objections right at the time with, and pointed out that they were using 2-year-old photos and that did not reflect the skyline that was currently before the applicant. The essence of what this appeal is all about, you saw that when Todd Herman put up the statute, and could we have that again, the slide showing the language of 4.3.16? And it's very clear, as I presented in my previous statement that 4.3.16 speaks of visually important ridgelines. Now, we did not, the applicants, Peter Lockyer, did not use that term in connection with the first cell tower appeal. It was staff that informed us when Mr. Lockyer submitted his management plans that, oh, we made a determination during the prior appeal that this was a visually important ridgeline, and now you're going to have to comply with the standards of a visually important ridgeline. This was complete news to us. They did it apparently based on the public comment and response at the first cell tower, saying if so many people must be objecting to what this sticks up above this ridgeline, it must be a visually prominent one. So now we are dealing with staff's determination like that. We never used that term until after staff informed us that they would be, the whole application would be judged that way. So we are dealing with the language that says, in no case shall the roof line or any portion of a structure extend above a visually important ridgeline. Now you just saw from the presentation that both staff made and Mr. Lockyer made, in no case does this garage extend above the ridgeline as staff is now conveniently defining it to be the tree line. So this should not even come into play if they're defining it as the tree line. But they don't. What they do is they define it as the ground line because they say you are 12 to 15 feet above the ground line. And therefore, as there's a potential projecting above the ridge line, if those trees are gone, therefore we might have to require the trees to stay. Well, we did offer, as it said, to do the trees that actually provided protection and screening, and the Lockyers were willing to do that at the time because that was, they provided shade and everything like that. There was no problem with those. But then staff went out here way to the east of our property and demanded the rest of these trees, and we started asking why. And it turned out that Verizon, in the meantime, had submitted its amended application, and that there had been correspondence between Verizon and county staff, unknown to us, in which our correspondence with Verizon was turned over to county staff and fomented all kinds of suspicions that we were about to cut trees. The trees that I mentioned in that letter that were orange flagged were the trees that would have had to come down to build the home and the garage, and they were flagged up on the site. Anybody could have gone up and seen them at that point because we offered that in the letter. But that wasn't done. Instead, the demand was lowered on us. Now you need a deed restriction. You're talking about cutting trees. We want to see exactly what trees you're going to cut. We want a deed restriction to keep you from ever doing that in the future. And it was all because Verizon turned over that letter and said, you better look into this. It looks like they're planning on cutting some trees up there. Well, you have to cut trees to put up buildings. That's right. And it's all, and the site plan and everything that we had submitted with our architect had all sailed through planning until that point. And that's when all of a sudden this started becoming an issue. And it's remained an issue ever since. And it's an unfair and unequal application of that language to say that our building cannot stick above the ridge line as being the ground line without a deed restriction requiring that we forever dedicate these trees, whereas Verizon can stick its structure above the same visually prominent ridge line, and no deed restriction needed, no guarantee that there will always be a backdrop behind the Verizon cell tower. That's a direct unequal violation of the Unequal Protection Clause. You're reading it, the same language, you're reading it directly opposite for us that you have read it for Verizon. And that is a constitutional violation. So we think you should accept the appeal and do the things that we request in order to allow us to proceed unhampered by these unreasonable and irrational restrictions on our ability to use our property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haley. Well, there's an opportunity presentation by project proponent, but I think that's duly covered here. So we'll proceed to the public hearing portion. I'll open the public hearing. It's an opportunity for members of the public to address or question the consideration of this. If you would like to speak, please come to the microphone.
Hi, my name is Don Carmichael. My company name is Previsualist Incorporated. I'm speaking simply as a resident of California and a member of the public. I don't represent Verizon, and I am an impartial expert on visual analysis. So I'd like to offer a few thoughts on everything that I've heard and reviewed online. There's an argument, basically, that if they don't follow the mitigation plan, then somehow they're going to cut down some trees. If they cut down trees, then the building will be visible. That seems to be unclear in what I've heard from both county staff and from the attorney. I'm not sure, there isn't enough information. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I do not think that you guys have all the information that you would need to make the determination whether the garage would be visible or not. I certainly do not agree with the line of sight analysis for two reasons. The first, that was done by the SOC engineering or something like that. The line of sight was too narrow. They said we want a line of sight from Pleasant Valley Road. I think there's a lot more areas within Lake Wildwood that are important rather than just Pleasant Valley Road. Clearly, if you're driving on Pleasant Valley Road, you should be looking at the road and not up at the skyline. One of the clarifications I want to make is that there's a lot of definition of ridge line, skyline, silhouette, and the tree line, and we have to be clear when we're talking about this because it's the most important point. It doesn't matter what the elevation of the ridge is. It doesn't matter. There's nobody on the ground looking up that can say, oh, that's 1692. Nobody knows the elevation. What matters is what you see. When you look up at that hillside, what do you see? What goes against the sky? I went to Lake Wildwood and I looked around at the other homes that are in the ridge lines to the south of that area, and as you look across, only one home has a portion of a roof that sticks up above the against the skyline. All the rest are backdropped or even with the roof lines or with the tree line. So it sounds like what the Lockyers are proposing is something that will silhouette against the sky, and everybody's kind of talking around it. Are they proposing something that, as you look up, it'll be a flat, straight, artificial line and not an undulating vegetative edge? And that edge can either come from backdropping or blocking in the foreground. But when the residents are looking up at the skyline, are they going to see something artificial and flat, or are they going to see natural vegetation? That hasn't been answered. The line of sight studies are fairly narrow, very specific for certain points. I'm not sure why the engineering firm only looked at Pleasant Valley Road. I'm not sure why Mr. Lockyer only looked at the parks within Lake Wildwood. There are plenty of areas from which that garage would be visible. Not a lot of places, but there would be public roads and homes and recreation areas from which that house would be visible. I handed to the clerk an example, and it shows the trees that were originally there. I know that the attorney wants to use the words trimmed, but when you take a 60-foot tree and you take a chainsaw at the ground level and you cut it off, I think that's removing a tree. That's not exactly trimming it. And I'm kind of wondering if these trees in the picture that you see had to be removed for the house, but Mr. Lockyer is making the argument that where the trees are is where the house is going to be, but you won't be able to see the house from any of the public areas. If you look at that picture and you remove the oak trees that are in the foreground behind the tank, you're going to see the garage. I mean, that's pretty simple, and I only have about 30 seconds, but I get the sense that the goal is to be able to look out and see the lake from the garage. If that's the goal, and I don't know if it is, if that is the goal, then the people at the lake will be able to see the garage. And I think that is the violation of the silhouette rule, when you look up and you see artificial shape. So I think that's all I wanted to interject into the discussion.
Thank you, Don. Supervisor Beeson has a question for you, Don. If you
Mr. Carmichael, thank you for coming. Where do you live in Nevada County?
Oh, I don't live in Nevada County. I live in El Dorado County.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
My name is Ed Thomas. I just wanted to say in form of thanks during this election period that we're all going through right now. I've sat through, almost 3 hours now of hearings here, and it's just an incredible example of democracy at work. And I just wanted to give you my appreciation of that, and thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. I can't tell you how rare that is, what you just did.
Can we applaud?
Is there anyone else that would like to speak before I close the public hearing? Okay, I will close the public hearing. We will move to summation by the project proponent. Mr. Haley.
Just briefly, in response to the public remarks, I cannot believe what I just sat here and listened to. You heard from a person who's not a resident of this county, who is employed by Verizon as their consultant to prepare all the photo simulations that were put into you by Verizon, and to offer his last-minute opinion of the evidence that we've carefully prepared and submitted over months. This is just a recurring example of how Verizon continually tries to interfere. I know he claims he's acting on his own, but he's a paid representative to do the work that you have been considering in the previous appeal. And it was misinformed because, for example, as Todd Herman misleadingly projected the elevation that isn't the elevation that's facing the ridge. The garage elevation that's facing the ridge is a sloping eave. So all that's visible is a triangle, a very tiny smidgen of a triangle that was represented by the flag that you have there in that picture that I submitted in the previous appeal. The last of the pictures shows exactly the flag, and county surveyor was up there to check that it was at the appropriate height and in the appropriate location. And I defy anyone here to say that they could see that flag from anywhere in Lake Wildwood, along any public road or any place of recreation or any other place. It was not visible. Simply not visible, proving the lines of sight are accurate. And this evidence that now comes in at the last minute is an attempt completely to torpedo the deliberation process here, and I object to it. So unless you have further questions of me, I'm going to let it be submitted on what I've given you.
I have one question. Is a representative from SCO here today?
No.
Okay.
Did you have any questions about the details of this? The other thing, I should make this point. As you can tell from those line of sight, and we've given you colors of all of them so that you don't have to deal with the black and white that's in the staff report. As you can tell from looking at those line of sight reports, the representation of the vegetation is schematic. It's not to scale. It doesn't purport to show every single tree. Those are little symbols for trees put in, and staff has treated them as though they are directly drawn to scale or some reason, or that in saying that if you remove those little symbols, then you will be able to see straight shot up to the garage. That's not correct at all, because the height of the trees varies greatly in between those points. And if that were true, you would have been able to see the garage at the demonstration on Friday, October 12th. And as I said, it was not possible to see. I went out there, went everywhere. We took photographs. We have submitted them to you. You just don't see that red flag anywhere unless you're up standing right next to it.
I do have a couple of questions.
Actually, I'm going to stay with the pattern. You'll have plenty of time to address. Yeah, I know. Address questions. I just like to try and move it, but we'll certainly have plenty of opportunity for questions on both sides. But we do have an opportunity for public rebuttal. 2 minutes, if anyone would like to. Okay, none? We'll go to staff summation, then we'll go to questions. I'll start with Supervisor Lampier. He has a question, but to sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Supervisors. Not too much new, but just to reiterate, the findings of the management plan, the purpose of the management plan is to avoid, then minimize, and then compensate for impacts to resources that are protected by the general plan, and one of those is ridgelines. So minimum or avoidance of the resource is always the first choice. Now, it could be argued potentially that another location on the site would not be visible at all, but frankly, staff did not pursue that. We went to minimization of the structure, which would be to try to screen it as much as possible. Given the information that we had, we did our best to provide, based on the applicant's line of sight drawings, to provide an area that could be protected that was within the control of the applicant. Typically, we don't place requirements for protecting trees off-site. When we're approving a project, it's up to the project to mitigate for itself, so that's why we were trying to protect trees on site that we felt provided visual protection of the structure. And the two sections, 4.316 and 3.8, as we've discussed over the last couple hours, are different sections applying to different types of projects. The 3.8 regarding the cell towers, we've been over that, but essentially, inherently, cell towers need a line of sight. They're envisioned to blend in with the surrounding area. Structures are much larger, much more artificial, and the camouflage needs to come in front of the structure. So those are the two different types of blending and camouflaging that are needed for the different applications of the different types of projects. The flag structure, that's a very small structure, or a very small area of something physical that was placed up there. I don't know that that represents the entire garage. So I don't know that just not being able to see that one corner of the flag is proof that you wouldn't be able to see the entire structure. So we have offered over the last year to work with the applicants to try to narrow and create a complete buffer that achieves what we want to achieve, but they've been reluctant and unwilling to work with us, so we did our best with the information we had, and that's what the management plan came out to be. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, thank you. If you'll remain, Supervisor Lampier, I think I had a question for Mr. Haley.
Well, maybe I'll defer to Supervisor Weston, being as his district.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, the red flag is the picture, and it actually, to answer Mr. Voss's comment, it represents the highest point of that eave. And the only part that projects above the ridge line that you would be able to see is the little tiny triangular shape of the eave that is represented by the flag. So
that would be the peak of the gable?
That's right. At the peak of the eave. Remember, it's a triangle. It's an eave going like this, so it slopes up and then immediately goes down. Right.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Terry.
Clarify for me, somebody, one of the slides, I believe, showed the garage that looked like it had a railing around the top. Is that correct?
Well, that's the south elevation that I think is... and
that's the garage, though?
That's the garage office. The top floor is an office.
So when, this will be for planning, so when you're defining what the roof line is, does that not include the railing?
I'll let Peter speak to it. He's more knowledgeable on his plans, but that how the eave affects we're not looking at the eave view here, right?
Yeah.
Peter, come to the mic.
We need you on the mic. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. That is the south elevation. It is the west elevation, or that is facing Pleasant Valley Road. So obviously 13 feet is the height of the what do I call it? Barriers. Sorry, the 13 feet is the height of the barriers. You then go back 8 or 10 feet to hit the front of the office, and the roof slopes up. So in other words, the lowest point is at the north end, and the highest point, which is where we put the red flag so that the test was entirely accurate and fair, is at the south end, but it's back 10 feet, obviously. If you,
Well-
sorry, if you understand. If we had, it would be slightly easier if we had a west elevation as the picture.
So the question goes back to, is this a flat roof?
No, it slopes like that.
It is sloped.
Yeah.
Right.
But there is that a railing around? That's
No,
supposed
there's
to be
no,
the roof.
I think,
Okay.
I think there's supposed to be solar panels.
Those are solar
Okay.
panels.
And
Okay.
also, perspective is wrong. I think it should be tipped that way.
It's not a widow's walk, I don't think.
Okay, that was that question, thank you.
It
That
tips
was
the other way, I think.
thoroughly answered. Now, my second question is, I gather, but it got a little confusing in here, are there areas of sight lines that you're both in agreement on that need to be preserved?
Just the ones that we agreed to with those 5 original trees that screen it from Pleasant Valley Road and views in that. Remember that east-west line that Peter drew on the presentation that you have in front of you. There's no way anything could ever be seen east of that line of any of this structure, trees or no trees. And west of that line is the only sight lines that we provided those from Pleasant Valley Road showing how the existing vegetation further down the hill on the NID parcel completely blocks any view up above to the ridgeline. And in one case, the towers themselves, the tanks, the water tanks themselves block that view.
Well, this next question is for staff. In terms of establishing these sight lines, it's only from public roadways? You don't have to consider private homes or anything in terms of whether they can see the ridge line or structures on it?
Well, from a CEQA standpoint, CEQA requires primarily public view protection. It does require some attention to be paid for private views. In this circumstance, we've generally been looking at public views only and not necessarily the private views. That's why we've looked at the parks and the roads and things that were open to the public.
So let me put it this way then, in terms of what we're tasked to do, if there were 20 or 30 or 10 or 5 or 50 houses on private property, which you normally would not go on to establish sight lines, if they're able to see this, we really don't consider that in our decision. It's really public roadways and parks and so forth?
Correct. Normally we focus on the public areas.
Okay. Now, were there trees cut or not? Some people say trimming, some people say cut to the ground. I'm confused on this.
I'll let Mr. Lockyer speak to that.
Sorry.
Or topping, trimming,
They
cutting?
were just. I spent a long time in March running around Gold Country Drive trying to work out the rational explanation of what the county were doing because I couldn't even see those trees. And in the end, I thought the only way to do it is just topped the top, a little bit off the top, and I still can't see those trees from Gold Country Drive because they are behind the trees on, not Nardi's, the other property. They are behind trees on someone else's property. I could not find a rational explanation for what the county would do. And I still haven't heard a rational explanation.
The question is, did you take any trees down to the
No,
base?
no trees were taken down to the base. I would also add, I'm not the first person to cut the trees in that area, and we should enter into the record. NID have cut their tree to facilitate their application, and for the record, it should show that, which Mr. Harmon, having visited the site, would also provide a photograph for if he was looking at that.
Well, I guess the challenge for me on this business was about the trees and topping, trimming, cutting, or what have you, and who did what. I look at the ridge line, there's several photos there, and you look like you have a continuous tree line and then a gap where your property is. So that just does not seem to be a normal, natural order, and I'm just trying to understand why.
So the gap is not at our house. Our house is much further to the left.
The gap was made by the trimming to try to prove, back when we were trying to prove to county staff that even if these trees are gone, you still on the east, you won't be able to see anything because the garage is much further than where they located it on their GIS thing. So it was just an attempt at the time. Maybe it was misguided in the sense that we didn't know where Verizon was going to propose its new tower, and I certainly, in suggesting and moving down the tower down the hill in 2011, did not intend to say that you could still stick it above the ridgeline. I wanted to go far enough down so that it wouldn't stick above the ridgeline. But the point is, we could not convince, after many sessions with staff showing these lines of sight, we could not get them to realize that the trees to the east had nothing to do with what the view to this proposed garage would be. And so in the end, and partly to convince himself, Peter, that he was right and show me, and then at some point we planned to show staff, and then it just never got anywhere because it was clear they weren't going to change their modifications once we got a letter from County Council to that effect.
So I have one more question, and then I have a comment, and the question is for staff. Help me out a little bit about private property and what you can do and can't do with trees on a site for such as this particular one here. Trimming okay, but you can't cut, or you can cut, or you can cut if you do certain kinds of things. Regardless of whether there's a house proposal or not, just in general, help me out with this.
Well, the county does not have a tree ordinance, so there is no tree protection requirements. When there is a discretionary project under review, then that usually establishes the baseline, and we don't generally want trees or the site changing. But there is no tree ordinance, so you can cut and trim trees outside of a discretionary review project.
So it may have complicated the appellant's situation, but it was still within the right to do these things?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my comment was about the points comparing the Verizon situation with the appellants in this particular case. And I do think it's a little surreal, but I'm satisfied with the county's explanation about the separate codes that we have, and I do think that they followed those appropriately with their recommendations. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Supervisor Beeson.
Thank you. Mr. Haley or Mr. Lockyer, you want to build a structure, you want to have a view, right? Is that what this all comes down to, basically?
Well, as you can see, the view is out to the south.
Right.
Yeah. The west side is which we don't see here. And
I'm not saying that's unreasonable. I'm just making sure that's what you want to do. I think if we deny this appeal, we'll be legal. And I think you guys have done a great job under very difficult circumstances. On the other hand, sometimes I think we pole vault over mouse droppings. And there is a dimension of fairness involved here, and I'm wondering if we could deny this appeal and give them some kind of a variance to be determined, or can we... I think there's a way to work this out. I know there's been a lot of ill will that's been generated, but maybe we could start with good faith and try to find some way to accommodate his view and maybe protect the view shed. I don't know. Is that possible?
I think it would be possible. We're definitely willing to work with the applicants, the Lockyers and Mr. Haley or whoever, to come up with a solution that works for both. I think mechanically...
I may be forever tagged as an anti-tree, anti-ridgeline guy, but I'm willing to take that risk.
I mean, the management plan is technically approved. They could withdraw the management plan, amend it. I mean, we can work through the mechanics of it, but we're definitely open to rediscussing it.
Do you think we could do something like that? Mr. Haley, do you think that'd work?
You know, after 2.5 years of battling the planning department, I'm afraid the good faith is simply lost. I'm sorry to report it has to be that way. It's not that we're being unreasonable, but for example, the only reasonable view here would be to say you don't need that extended east area at all, and you don't need anything beyond the original 5 trees that we were proposing. And I'm not even sure that we're ready to go there at this point because of the hundreds of thousands of dollars this whole thing has cost. And you know, it's like it's been a battle every inch of the way, trying to prove our points and trying to make the considerations apply. So I mean...
Well, this is the first time this item's been to the board.
Yes, that's right. We tried to work it out in, as I said, we went the first appeal period run because we tried to work things out. We went further on. I had a personal meeting with staff and everything like that. I tried to explain the lines of sight to them.
Well, staff works hard.
I understand.
And they try to do what's right within the regulations.
Right.
And we're here to, we have some discretion.
I think we just need a decision at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Schofield. I'm going to want that same perspective brought back up in a second, just so you know.
Well, frankly, I was leaning the same way that Supervisor Beeson was. I listened to both sides here, and I could see where staff was coming from, and then I listened to the appellants and the private rights concerns, and I agree with Nate. I mean, you buy property such as that for views in many cases, and if you can provide that, I certainly think we should. And then Mr. Carmichael made some good points, and yet then Mr. Haley says Mr. Carmichael represents Verizon. Well, I think, good gosh, keep Verizon out of this if we possibly can. But if there's no willingness to continue to work with staff on this, then, and you want that decision, I think you have a plan in place there, Alan, then I would have to stay with the planning department and say, I understand you need to move forward, and the decision in my mind would be to support staff on this.
Thank you, Supervisor. I have a couple quick questions. On this elevation, I'm assuming on the left side would be the entrance for automobiles? Correct? Okay. Is part of, okay, Supervisor Beeson asked a really good question. We're just trying to capture views here, and nobody wants to say that. But is part of it having to do with solar gain, with your solar panels?
Solar panels to the south, right. That's the maximum exposure.
So that's another part of the issue in addition to...
Yeah, so what you're seeing there is the sloping up toward the eave.
Slopes down.
The perspective of that is wrong.
Depending on which way you're talking from.
No, I understand the...
Yeah. And so, I mean, the lowest part of that roof is right over the window and the doors. The highest part, right? Other way around.
The lowest part is at the front, where the entrance to the garage is. On the north elevation, the entrance.
Right. Well, anyway, as I said, it's you have a complete set of plans, I think, in the record, and you can get the elevations from different viewpoints there.
I was just curious if part of the issue had to do with if there were no trees removed on the south elevation, then you've got an issue with your solar gain for your panels. Is that a consideration or not?
There may be one tree which would be
okay, so that's not too bad.
There perhaps would be one tree.
Okay. My own view, I think, Mr. Haley, I've heard your comments. I agree with Supervisor Beeson and Schofield on this one. My preference would be, with some direction, to try to work this thing out and not have it be pursued any further. But you're telling me, hands down, I guess, you're beyond that. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, because I don't see any outcome that doesn't involve a deed restriction. And the complication, as soon as you impose a deed restriction, is that are they asking it for Verizon's sake, or are they really asking it to protect the view? And that's what we tried to prove with our demonstration, the red flag, that there was nothing there. And I'm still hearing them. I'm not hearing planning back off of that, saying they're still claiming that those trees are necessary to protect the view.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Allison, do you concur that there's no way of making this work without a deed restriction?
I don't. Actually, staff tried very hard to work with Mr. Haley and the Lockyers, and my recollection is that Mr. Haley shut down the negotiations. I think there are options yet to be explored, personally.
I never heard any expression at any time until now that county or staff was willing to abandon a deed restriction.
What if we made a motion of intent to deny and give them some time, and if they don't come up with something, then we can finalize it?
30 days.
We table it?
Yeah.
I like it.
I think we should have a motion of intent to deny.
Okay.
Because that'll hopefully maybe try to capture some sort of at least working relationship. I don't know.
Supervisor
you guys
Weston.
may have better ideas.
No, I was thinking the same thing that you were thinking, Nate. When I look at the pictures, I have a hard time, even this one that's proposed that shows the big trees cut, but the monopine Inn, ever seeing that garage behind those two towers and those trees. I mean, I just have a hard time believing that you'd be able to see it. Now, I guess I could drive somewhere in Lake Wildwood, climb a tree, or get on a back porch, and I may be able to see it. But
if you're going to climb a tree, let me know. I want to come watch.
But my feeling is
I want
that
to be near that.
would you click back to what was your boundary? This big one in red, right?
Correct.
Now, to me, it seems a little excessive. There was a green area right here in the middle that seemed to me to be somewhat reasonable. There was a green box you kept pointing to. But this one going down the hill and all of that, well, that's somewhat aggressive.
Hang on.
It was a green box. There. Yeah. It seems to me that gives you the blockage that you're looking for, and along with the trees that Mr. Lockyer said he would leave in. There's 5 of them up there. So, I mean, I'm not the staff. I'm looking at it here. You know, what can we make work at the same time give you the visual aesthetics that you want? And if you want us to rule, then that's fine. But I think there's an option in there to make it work. I know staff said they have tried. They're willing to sit down. Mr. Haley, you say that they're not, but I think it's come here now. They have offered that they'll give it a try. I mean, it seems to me trying doesn't hurt. Trying doesn't make it so final. If you can't do it, fine, you can't do it. But I think it's always worth one more try. So that's my feeling. If you want it, fine. We'll uphold the appeal, but I think there's an option.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Lampier.
a couple of quick follow-ups. Just to refresh my memory here, the expansion to the east with that larger chunk was basically because you went out, did further analysis, and identified that, and you hadn't seen that before. Is that correct?
That's correct, based on the sight lines that we received later from the applicant, and then Todd and I both went out and viewed the site from Lake Wildwood and Pleasant Valley Drive. But it's
Okay.
mostly from Lake Wildwood.
Then another thing that was raised originally by Supervisor Beeson, should we deny this and they don't follow up and it becomes the conditions and they go forward with their project, would they have the option of coming forth later in a different process and ask for a variance or an amendment or something? I don't know the procedure on this. Outside of litigation, just normal process.
Well, before a building permit would be approved, we would need an approved management plan. So they don't necessarily have to implement the approved management plan, but they would have to come back with something that we were able to approve before issuing a building permit. So if the board were to uphold or deny the appeal and uphold the decision, it would just be an approved management plan that would need to be implemented prior to building permits, but that doesn't mean they can't amend it or withdraw it or reapply.
Okay, thank you. Well, so I'll just make my comment. I like Supervisor Beeson's suggestion of a motion of an intent.
I'm going to make a motion. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I move that it be the intention of this Board of Supervisors to deny this appeal with the provision that the applicants or the appellants and staff have 30 days to try to work out an arrangement by which we can honor the property owner's desire for a view and still try to conform reasonably with our ridgeline
I would
requirements.
second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. It's a motion of intent. Donna, roll call, please.
District 2,
Yes.
District 1.
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 4.
Yes.
District 5.
Yes. And the motion carries, and I think the sense of the board is very clear that we are very hopeful that all parties can work in good faith and find a solution before the expiration of 30 days. And with that, the Board of Supervisors stands adjourned.
Welcome to episode 8 of Drawing the Line. Today we are visiting Mustang Valley Ranch, owned and operated by Greg and Catherine Diaz and Deborah Alfred. Located in the foothills of western Nevada County, Mustang Valley Ranch is not your ordinary ranch. You won't find cattle, horses, or sheep here, but you will find something else. Yes, alpacas. Alpacas look like small llamas, but unlike most llamas, alpacas are not used as pack animals. Instead, well, alpacas are raised for their lustrous and silky natural fiber coats, which are used to create blankets, sweaters, hats, and gloves. I personally find alpacas great subjects to draw, mainly because they are so cute, well, and goofy looking. So let's go draw some alpacas. These are some really cute critters going here, and look like they worked up an appetite. It was a real hot day today, so I'd be hungry too. Okay, let's do. You know, the alpacas are in the camel family. They're a lot smaller. I guess they're related to the llamas. And they've got great hairdos. I think that's one thing I like about the alpacas. They look like Rod Stewart or Tina Turner even. That would be, I can see a lot of, it's oh, look at this one staring right at us. Let's get that over them too. That's just a great look. This one looks like Ringo Starr. They're looking at me as if they're posing, which is great. You keep up the good work, girls. Oh, look at, oh, that's a great shot. These long necks, which are really great to draw too. That's a cute one. Let's try another angle. Let's paint this little lady over here by the dinner trough, okay? She's got quite an appetite for such a small little petite alpaca. Let's see. I want to do a facial shot of her. She's just beautiful. I love their hairdos. Come on, little girl. Let's see that. Yeah. What's great about alpacas is they don't have to kill them to make money from them. They can just shear their lustrous, fibrous coat and then sell it for people that make sweaters and blankets and all that kind of stuff out of it. They're great out of their great fur. She's got a little bit of straw in her mouth too, so let's... There you go. Well, as you can see, I'm sweating like a stuck pig out here. It's close to 100 degrees, and we're surrounded by alpacas. Well, look at over here. This is what we call a group shot. We got them all at the dinner trough. We got heads and neck everywhere. So, let's try it. This is a great shot. Let's see, we got one looking at me. We got several heads over there. Look at those hairdos. Whoa. Really? Some of them look like they have beetle haircuts. Go. This one's a good one too. I think they're eating alfalfa right now. That's what it looks like to me. I like a little more, well, protein in my diet, but that's cool. It's a little like whiskers, but it's actually alfalfa. Oh, look at this one right here. We go to the right, our right over here, and we can see a really great looking young lady. Pan back here, you can see what I mean. Let's get one more in there, like he's looking at us, or like she's looking at us. I keep referring to them as males, but these are all females. There we go, a group of alpacas. I want to thank Deborah, Catherine, and Greg for having us out here today at Mustang Valley Alpaca. Please join us next week for episode 9 of Drawing the Line.